You better be listening to Sleazoids or I must bring you.
Clint Eastwood, the man. Eiger, the mountain. Deadly combination. Sanction, a violation of the law to enforce the law.
3 shots have been fired at President John Kennedy.
It was his job to safeguard the destiny of the nation.
Today, America mourns the loss of President
But at the
John
critical
Fitzgerald.
moment, he was a split second too late. Now, after a lifetime of second thoughts and second guesses, Secret Service agent Frank Horrigan is about to get a second chance.
Yeah.
Frank Horrigan,
Yeah.
I've read about you, seen photos. You were JFK's favorite.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Sleazoids, the podcast where we go down the rabbit hole of 20th century genre fare from the most influential canon classics to the trashiest exploitation films we can get our hands on and invite you to tag along in helping us create a canon of sleaze. Each week is a double feature grindhouse style where we discuss 2 films loosely related by subject, genre, actor, filmmaker, or franchise, and at the end of each episode, along with our honorary Sleazoids, which you can become by subscribing on Patreon,
we are either talking more about our boy Eastwood or we're going corn mode. I still am completely unsure, but it's going to be
I
a
forgot
time.
to tell Jamie about that.
Yeah,
We didn't
so
coordinate that.
I'm excited either way, so join the sleaze.
Yeah, we decide on all the official ratings and rankings for every film that we cover. Patreon subscribers also get an on-air shout-out and 2 bonus episodes every single month, which we have been doing for 5 years at this point. There's like 130 plus bonus episodes, as well as our bonus transmission series, where we talk about new release genre films currently in theaters now. So if you haven't made the jump yet, patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast would definitely recommend doing that. And speaking of which, we do have a bunch of shout-outs to give this month. We have Mitchell Camp, who signed up. We had Mike Wave. We had Garrett Nicholson, Aiden Andrew Chow, Jordan Macapagal, Juan Morano, Cameron Watson, Stephen Schwartz, Four Peoples, Nick Weiss, Jason Reed, Eric Hawkins, Harrison Hart, R. Landry, Ben, Jim Alexander, Joshua McGonigal, Trevor Tremaine, Catherine Lizzie, Matt CJ Barbado, Joshua Lynch, Kill Wolfhead, Amafi, who upgraded from $5 a month to $10 a month and will be joining us for the monthly virtual screenings, which is going to be an Eastwood one this month. So look forward to that. Dylan Lamb, Vincent Portruca, who signed up for an entire year of the show, which you can do and get a discounted rate. Thanks so much for doing that. And we also had Patrick Sexton and Ami and Nathan F. So thanks so much to all of you folks for signing up. We appreciate the support there.
Yeah, thank you.
And that's your one plug for the week. The other plug, as always, is Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you were listening on either one of those platforms, and I see the stats, I can see you right now listening on both those platforms, give us a good old rating and review down at the bottom. Helps us climb the ranks and find new listeners. And the very last plug is merch. If you like the poster art that based out of Toronto horror artist Trevor Henderson did for the show, you can get that put on basically anything that you can think of. And you guys have thought of a lot of things. Pens, hoodies, notebooks, pillows, just a poster for your apartment. It is at the link in the description, as well as over at sleazoidspodcast.com for anyone interested. But that is it for the intro. Welcome back to another week. As always, I am your host, Josh Lewis, and joining me also, as always, is my co-host,
Jamie Miller. Welcome back, everybody.
Welcome. I think 2 weeks ago would have been the last time you folks over on the main feed would have heard from us, and we would have had special guest Brendan James of the Blowback podcast on to discuss some feverish, paranoid 1980s psychotherapy psychodramas with a double feature of William Peter Blatty's Catholic guilt-ridden quasi-satire, quasi-horror film, The Ninth Configuration from 1980, as well as Battlefield Earth director Roger Christian's debut film, The Sender from 1982, which is a relatively minor but still pretty eerie and dreamy little telekinetic horror film trying to cash in on movies like Carrie and Patrick, which were big at the time, and definitely something he should be better known for alongside his production design for Alien than Battlefield Earth anyway.
Yeah, he really did get a bad rap for Battlefield Earth because the Sender is decent. I would recommend it.
And we, as we argue with Brendan, the directing is maybe the best part of the movie.
Yeah,
totally. It's stylish, it's good.
Totally.
So if you haven't heard that episode, that was over on the main feed 2 weeks ago. Go back and check it out. But then last week over on the Patreon feed for the patrons exclusively, we did your guys' patron voted episode, because once every 2 months we have you guys vote on the double feature you want to hear us talk about. And we did your episode, which you made Jamie watch an over 3 hour long movie. He was angry about
How dare
it.
you.
He took the necessary heads and we moved on, and we went through The Looking Glass and talked two political assassination conspiracy thriller classics, both connected to the Kennedy brothers. We talked Alan J. Pakula's MK Ultra / Lee Harvey Oswald Patsy Machine thriller, The Parallax View from 1974, as well
good.
as Oliver Stone's fever dream epic, basically, JFK from 1991. It was a monster episode, and if you haven't heard it, again, patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast. That was last week's episode. It was pretty nuts. We had the documents out. We were scanning.
Oh yeah, 3.5 hours of just speaking the truth. That's what that is.
Still shorter of an episode than JFK, so I will take it.
Slightly.
Yes, but yeah, that was last week over on the Patreon. But moving on to this week, and surprisingly actually lining up in terms of subject matter with last week's episode, we have a special returning guest joining us, the co-host of Chapo Trap House and Mr. Movie Mindset himself, Will Menaker. Will, how you doing?
Wonderful to be here, lads. Let's get right to it. I with one of the movies today, I saw it not too long ago, so I'm gonna need you to refresh my memory. What is the name of the dog in the Eiger Sanction again? Could you guys just say that for me one more time? Just jog my memory here.
Oh, no problem, Bill. It's, yeah, not getting canceled. We don't have enough rep for that.
It's a good time. We're gonna have a good time talking about these movies today. Actually, it was very funny putting this episode together, because when I reached out to Will, I was like, it's been a while since we chatted with you, and I noticed just watching your Letterboxd feed, because you've become something of a Letterboxd influencer in our time knowing each other. You were going hardcore Clint Eastwood mode for a while there. So, first of all, what was that about? I mean, other than living screen legend, of course. And second of all, what two films from that Eastwood marathon are we going to be talking about today?
I simply have to admit that the genesis for my Eastwood binge is due entirely to the efforts of LA's #1 film critic Lex G and his Clint Eastwood the Clint Eastwood lightning round episode he did, where he basically did every movie in like the first half of Clint's career. I love the Lex G movie podcast. He's an inspiration. And really, like, I realized listening to that episode that I had never seen the Eiger Sanction. And it was Lex saying a line from Clint in that movie, or not a line said to Clint in that movie, where a woman says to Clint's character, "You broil a mean steak, Hemlock." And from that moment, I knew that I had to watch the Eiger Sanction. And when you asked me what Clint Eastwood movie should we do, I chose the one that I'd seen most recently and was the most. Let's just say there's a lot to talk about in the Eiger Sanction. And then I wanted to follow it up with one of my favorite movies of all time, certainly one of my favorite Clint movies of all time, a movie that I remember seeing on TV no less than a dozen times when I was a kid. But it's In the Line of Fire. Eastwood and Malkovich facing off. But why don't you guys take it away? It's the Eiger Sanction and In the Line of Fire, starring God Clint.
Yeah, it really worked out with us doing JFK the week before too. So
yeah, honestly, In the Line of Fire would have made a good pairing with JFK as well. So and the fact that both of them are also assassination sort of conspiracy thrillers a little bit as well. The Eiger Sanction more of the Bond espionage type, whereas In the Line of Fire has a little bit more of the more presidential conspiracy thriller elements. But yeah, no, it's going to be very, very exciting, and also talking about Clint Eastwood directing in the 70s going back, and also a director we've never talked about on this show, but who recently passed away, and we should give a shout out to, which we will be doing, Wolfgang Petersen. So I'm excited to jump into it here, but I think we're going to start things off chronologically. We're going to jump into the Eiger Sanction.
And now Montaigne's either hurt or he's dead. I knew that'd be death.
It was planned that way.
His lifeline in the hands of the assassin he hunted.
All right, we are talking The Eiger Sanction, the 1975 American action espionage thriller directed by and starring Clint Eastwood and based on the 1972 novel of the same name by one Rodney Whitaker, who also went under the pen name Trevanian. And I'm glad we're finally doing this because I looked it up and it has actually been over a year since we've talked about Clint Eastwood. We last spoke about him actually doing an episode on his sort of origins and his early directing gigs. We talked about High Plains Drifter and Outlaw Josie Wales because we really wanted to talk about when he finally kind of took control of his own image and the sort of myths around it and the Western genre and started to play around with it. So if you want to go back and hear that episode, that's very much all about the legend of, Eastwood first getting spotted walking around the sets and everyone just being like, wow, that's a very tall, handsome man. Do you think he would ever be an actor? And eventually, getting bit roles in like the sequel to The Creature from the Black Lagoon and getting the co-starring on Rawhide and all of that. But the gist that I want to bring up from that was this great quote that we found from Eastwood very early in his career when he was doing the Sergio Leone Westerns, where he basically said, and it defined, honestly, his career as a director as well. I wanted to play with an economy of words and create this feeling through attitude and movement. It was just the kind of character I had envisioned for a long time. Keep the mystery and the allure, everything in the past. And it came about after the frustration of doing, Rawhide and Western TV for so long that it became this idea of how can I grow my presence in the imagination of the audience through, style and through look. And I actually, before when I was looking for a copy of In the Line of Fire to do this episode, I ended up finding an old 70s profile from Look magazine I wanted to just bring up for a second up at the top, because there's a quick passage in it that just kind of sums up his screen appeal. And it's the profile guy writing that Eastwood drove a police issue Plymouth to the cafe with a tombstone seriousness on his ruddy face with wide, sharp cheeks like the polished blade of an axe and the enormous shoulders that would give him a tough fit in an airplane hangar. And he was frisking the room with his eyes like a cop trying to figure out which patron has a time bomb. Like, this writer is getting stoked thinking he's in one of his movies, just sitting across from this guy. Like, that's the level of magnetism that Eastwood kind of has as a presence. And I like going back to when he started directing himself, because you can really feel the control that he had over that image and what he wanted to do with it. Now, we are going to be talking about probably one of the silliest possible variations of it, only because he was offered Bond at one point in his career. And I think it did kind of become tantalizing at a certain point that maybe he could have tried doing it. And it's very funny. Like, this is the movie, The Eiger Sanction, today we're talking about, is probably closest in spirit to his other goofy espionage Eastwood movie we've done, Firefox, which was him doing the Cold War Top Gun Maverick shenanigans. But
I can't remember. Was it as silly as this?
Honestly, yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
It almost felt like a bit of a sequel. It even has like the neon red, room with the bad guy in it and everything like that.
Yeah, because I guess this was based on a James Bond spoof. That's right. If I'm not mistaken, the Eiger Sanction is, I think, supposed to be like a spoof of James Bond itself.
The original novel is, yes.
Yeah. And this kind of goes with it. There's some, we'll get to the details, but there's some weird things here where it's like there's a lot of a serious tone, but then outright just comical tone too that gets a little bit strange, but it's definitely captivating, I guess.
This is this is a weird one. I think you guys have set it up quite ably. Like, I'm watching this movie, like this is an American stab at like an American James Bond character with Clint Eastwood in the role of Professor Hemlock. John Hemlock. And instead of being like, an MI6 agent, he's like an art professor and thief who's like also a button man for an albino Nazi. And like, okay, here's the thing about the Eiger. Here's the thing about the Eiger Sanction that like I wasn't quite prepared for, because like once again, kudos to Lex G for like alerting me to this large gap in my my Eastwood knowledge. And the thing is about Eastwood is like, screen legend, God Eastwood. He does come in for some criticism of being sort of like in his films and his screen presence, sort of an avatar of like reactionary white male racism and misogyny. And like that never really felt appropriate to me until I saw this movie, because it is everything. It is everything that critics who complain about Eastwood they're talking about this movie and basically none of the other ones. I mean, like, Dirty Harry does not have shit on Professor Hemlock. The stuff that he said, the shit that he says in this movie is I would not just say dated, but is like out of control. It's out of control.
Yeah, no, like there's some stuff in here, and we'll warn people up front. Like, it's genuinely pretty offensive and indefensible stuff, and it's funny because as Jamie mentioned, like, the material was intentionally written as a parody of James Bond. And so, like, the guy was making that, being like, well, yeah, what if this guy was like super racist and super sexist? But because Eastwood is involved, and because Eastwood took the gig seemingly as an opportunity to shoot the really incredible stunt photography that he got in this film, so much so that when he was originally looking to get into making it, I think he originally asked his longtime collaborator Don Siegel, who did like Escape from Alcatraz and did Dirty Harry and The Beguiled and everything with him, because he was like, I kind of really want this to be like a very show-off action picture for my audience, and he wasn't fully convinced that.
He even knew the script was kind of off too. I think he mentioned himself that he's going to hope that the action sequences and the great climbing the climbing footage that he gets is going to make up for the kind of shortcomings of the narrative. So he seemed to have an idea already of what he was handling, I guess.
Yeah, which is just so bizarre that he plays the material completely straight. He doesn't play it like any of this is a joke.
Not most of it. That's why when the moments that happen that are clearly spoof, they're very jarring, and they do kind of make it so it's funnier at times. Some of them are kind of just way over the top and very dated, but there's other ones, like later on when they're doing a climbing, there's a specific one where he does like a zoom out and everything, and it's completely comedy, and it's directly after a very dramatic and intense scene. So there's just things like that all the time that pop up in this that are jarring, but yeah, they're still entertaining, I guess. But he knew about them for sure.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And the marketing of this film was very funny. They were very much like, I found it in the old trailer that Jamie might have even played up front. It's like Clint Eastwood, the man, Eiger, the mountain, a deadly combination, and Sanction, a violation of the law to enforce the law. Like, they're trying to get like the dirt, a little bit of the Dirty Harry as well as the Bond. They even have making him an art professor. You have a little bit of like those old serials that would inspire Indiana Jones and stuff like that as well. Yeah, I was going to say, they have the scene where basically they have everything except for the they don't have the girls closing her eyes and saying like I love you on her eyelids or anything like that, but they basically have the whole because it's like it's Eastwood in the 70s, so instead of like the charming 1940s like archaeology class where the girls have I love you written on their eyelids, the film essentially begins with Clint Eastwood being propositioned for sex by a co-ed to get a passing grade on like the art history midterm or whatever, right? And of course, and Professor Hemlock, he's a gentleman. Like, he's not the kind of professor that would sleep with a student for a grade. He'll merely just slap her on the ass and say, "Get your ass home and study."
Which happens twice in this movie, where they have like just, and the second time it's just a random girl in a bathing suit comes up, stares at Eastwood, and that's it. And then his friend Ben says something like, "We're talking," smacks her on the ass. They do another close up, and she walks away. And it's just like they do it, twice, and it's actually also in one of the James Bond movies with Sean Connery. I can't remember which one, but he does the same thing where a girl comes up and then he says something like, "Not right now, honey, man talk," and then smacks her on the ass, and he walks and makes her walk away. And I was like, I don't know. I couldn't tell if they were trying to spoof that directly or if they were just doing the same thing and trying to channel like the exact same energy. It was hard to tell.
But it's one of those things that you can tell in the material is very playfully being like, well, exactly the way that Will framed it. Like, he wouldn't do that, but he would, would still kind of, do that. And it is funny too with Eastwood. Like, he's playing, again, he's meant to be sort of nerdy, but also very like he's all gray wool blazers, and he's got like the turtlenecks and the pedophile glasses that he's rocking.
the whole Professor Hemlock character is like it's so odd because like if you think about it as like what is the American response to like Sean Connery's James Bond? It's like, okay, like he's pretty cool, but like he's like a art thief and a college professor. He is like an art history professor who's also an assassin.
And an elitist who has his own collection, too.
Yeah. He's not interested in displaying it in a museum. He just wants to look at his paintings that he steals or otherwise acquires through ill-gotten means. But, like, he really is, like, even more of an asshole and a lowlife than Sean Connery is as James Bond. And then, like, on top of all... If that CV isn't good enough for this character already, he's also one of the world's best mountain climbers. And the weird thing is like 2/3 of this movie is like it starts out like a James Bond movie, and then like the second 2/3 of the movie have like almost nothing to do with like international espionage or an assassination plot or anything like that.
No.
It's just training. It is training for and then climbing the Eiger Mountain, the Eiger Sanction.
Yeah, and what I find interesting
which we find out later he didn't even really probably have to do because it was such a dangerous climb that all of these people were probably just going to die doing this climb regardless of him, which is one of the funniest touches in the whole thing because like it opens with like men in trench coats and fedoras having secret meetings and exchanging microfilm, and you're like, oh, this is very Bond. You know, you got like little murder set pieces and like the wide angle lens shots of, you know, a spy, you know, slitting another spy's throat, and he's getting meetings with like this old colleague named Pope, played by Gregory Walcott from Plan 9 from Outer Space, who is telling him that he needs to go back and see his ex-Nazi boss, the Dragon, played by Thayer David.
That name
and
is
I
awesome.
like that in this early stuff, they're setting up very much a story you could imagine Bond being a part of, where he's refusing the call and he's being like, I'm kind of done with, you know, all of this wet work. But Eastwood is still playing it with like a little bit of that Dirty Harry attitude where he's making like smart ass quips, but that like but with just that like tough guy venomous delivery that he kind of excels at, which isn't really the way like Bond would be more charming about it. He's kind of just an asshole. And like when he goes to that meeting with the Dragon, and I do want to like reiterate, he's like an albino ex-Nazi. He's like literally shot like he's a universal monster.
Yes.
And you honestly kind of feel bad for the names that Eastwood calls him, where he's just like, you know, he's going into his blood red evil espionage office, and they're, you know, he's like, I wonder what kind of stuff they plan in there. And I think he said, I thought it was rather humorous myself, a spy network being run by a bloodless freak who can't stand the light or cold.
Yeah, he's absolutely ruthless to everyone that he comes in encounter with.
I do appreciate this movie, though, being honest and making it a key part of the plot that, like, you know, the CIA was just like Operation Paperclip and just put all these fucking Nazis in charge of our intelligence apparatus. And like, it's not much remarked. It's just not much remarked upon. You know, like the Dragon is like, he's a bad guy, but like he's still Clint's boss.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, and when some of the other agents try to get a little bit like, don't you care about like your country anymore? And they even give Eastwood like a little sort of like monologue back where he's like, you think it's so terrible that the other side has a germ formula and it's against the Geneva Convention and that they stole it from us? What the hell were we doing with it? You know, he's like, as long as we have dragons and popes working for us, like how bad can the other side be? Which is also just funny names for the characters that make that line kind of funny too.
Yeah. Oh my god.
But yeah, so like the main thrust of it is that he is brought in by this Dragon to come in and sanction these two men, even though he is through with the wet work, he's through with the killing. He just wants to collect his art that none of the unwashed masses, as he says it, appreciate the way that he does. And it's funny that the way of blackmail is, we will tell the IRS about your collection.
Yeah.
They're just like, okay, well, we won't tell the IRS and we'll pay you $20,000 if you do this mission. And very quickly, he's kind of like, yeah, I guess I don't want the IRS knowing how I paid for this art collection, so I guess I'll do this mission. And it is immediately followed up by him killing off the first guy in a bizarre scene where Eastwood is scoping out his target by knocking on his door and pretending to be a gay dental floss delivery man.
Yeah, complete with the accent he was doing.
He was doing like the full flamboyant voice impression and everything. I've never seen Eastwood do anything like this before.
Yeah, listeners, I mean, like this movie will hook you in and get its claws into you very early on in the movie, where you see Clint Eastwood do his patented one time only, never to be seen again, gay guy character, and like it doesn't stop there, because it follows it up by including like the most mincing stereotype of a gay man ever portrayed in a movie, but not before Clint himself is just like, got a candygram for you, like, you want some dental floss, like,
my God,
it's wild. And this is even before they introduce the sexy black lady spy whose name is Jemima.
Right. And don't worry, they get away with it because they have a whole conversation about how
ridiculous it
is and what would the chances of that be. And I think her answer
Eastwood's quip back to her is unreal, where he's like, "Oh, you're Jemima Brown? Well, I'm Uncle Ben." Unfucking real. And and what's the other line he gets? He's like, "Oh, was your mother horny for pancakes?" Like just the most boneheaded replies.
Yeah, and even her, like, she says something like her mother just liked being ethnic or something like that. Like, it's just the most bizarre dialogue I've ever heard, and it's trying to play as comedy, I suppose, in that sequence, but. I
mean, like, we're getting to like in a romantic moment between him and Jemima.
Yeah, this is their meet cute.
He says there. I mean, like, he meets her on an airplane, and like a dragon has sent her to like check up on him or whatever. But like, it doesn't stop him from seducing her. And like, they're back at his art chalet, and like they're having a glass of wine in front of a fireplace. And I forget what the setup is, but he says to Jemima, "You never know. Sometimes people do things they thought they'd never do again, like rape, for instance. Yeah, I thought I'd give that up." And it's just like
what the hell was that?
I feel like it's played for laugh, and like I just love the idea that this is like the American answer to James Bond, who's like the cool, suave. He's a little bit thuggish, but he's always got like the martini, and he's playing baccarat in like Monaco or whatever. But this guy, Clint Eastwood, is just picking up stewardesses and then making jokes about raping them back at his house.
Yeah,
and while like the jazzy lovemaking music is kind of playing, they're in front of the fireplace. Like, this is meant to be like a very charming sequence. That's meant to be a charming line where she comes deeper inward to him, and it's just horrifying.
And I was trying to go back to something we mentioned earlier about like his art collection, the fact that he's an art professor. We'll see this again in The Line of Fire, but I really like in Clint's movies, he is always tempering his tough guy bona fides with like, by giving his character always has some sort of artistic affectation or interest or hobby, like, whether it's playing jazz music, being a painter, being an art collector. Like, he always has these highbrow tastes, and that he's like larding into these tough guy roles. And I think that's just like that. I think that is a personal touch from Clint, giving a bit of himself to the viewer as like something to sort of, I don't know, to juxtapose with this like asshole tough guy persona that he's so popular for.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and Jemima Brown, I can't believe I have to say that. We're going to have to keep saying that over and over again. Her, being hired by the dragon to come in, and he thinks it is to seduce her and to steal all of his materials back, because he doesn't only agrees to do the one sanction, he doesn't agree to do the second sanction, the more dangerous one, where he has to climb the Eiger mountain in Switzerland to go and kill his second target, which he eventually agrees to do because they find out that the agent who was killed in the opening scene was actually a close friend of his, and that and also they say, and look, we're closer to identifying the killer. We know he's a mountain climbing enthusiast with a limp, which Eastwood is like, well, good, I'll kill a few thousand men with sore feet then. And he does eventually, agree that he'll climb the mountain, but he hasn't done it in a little while. He's a little out of shape. So as Will mentioned, they spend an entire, which is basically an hour of the film.
It's a long time.
On like on like what it amounts to a training montage.
George Kennedy's Alpine mountain climbing school.
Yes, with his old pal Ben, played by George Kennedy, who's also awesome. And I'm assuming in this film because they had some great chemistry together in Michael Cimino's Thunderbolt and Lightfoot.
Yes.
And both of them became actual friends on that film, which is why he brought him along for this. And yeah, George Kennedy picks him up and he's like, come out and hang out at my Monument Valley, sort of like climbing school. And they got to film it actually at Monument Valley, which you could tell Eastwood was ecstatic to do because that's where they filmed so many of those classic John Ford Westerns, and he gets to use their landscapes in the same way that he did, and he actually gets to climb the landscapes as well as like run around with like a sexy native girl who
oh boy, we're now getting into the second or third insane stereotype in this movie is George Kennedy's mountain climbing assistant, who is a Native American woman who is quite well endowed, that gives Professor Hemlock some needed motivation to really commit to training to climb this Eiger mountain.
Exposes herself to him so that he will be motivated to climb that mountain, despite the fact that he is, Eastwood. I don't know exactly how old he is around this time, but he's not the youngest guy. He's like 45 or something like that. Yeah, and. He's got to get physically fit, and she needs to inspire and motion for him.
And we get to the next round of Clint's insane and hilarious war crimes against various people. But so the Native American lady is like running him ragged, like over all these trails or whatever, and he's kind of out of shape, so he's gassed and gasping, and she just like keeps going, and she's like, no, like more, like more training. And then he drops some great one-liners on her, like, God, I wish Custer won. And my favorite, probably the funniest line in the movie when she just like laps him on some mountain trail. He goes, "Fuck Marlon Brando."
That's the best one. Me and my brother howled
bit of topical humor. I was dying at that. Yeah, you just like
it's so random. It's in this beautiful shot where he's like running through water, and the water's spraying up, and he's got there's like these mountains behind him, and he's just like, "Screw Marlon Brando."
Unbelievable.
Oh my God. I rewound it. I think I watched that 3 times. It's so funny.
Yeah. Well, and there's also a sequence later where he has sex with her, and after having sex with her, he has to punch her because she's paid to like drug and kill him with like a big old needle after the sex scene. Like it's so insane how fast this stuff happens, and like the kind of relationship he has with all of these like bizarre, stereotypical sort of like caricatures that peppered the film. And like this sequence, this section of the film is also where we're introduced to his former colleague who betrayed him in Asia, is all we really know about his backstory.
That's all that's
happening. He is a gay agent named Miles who has a dog named
it's the most commonly used slur for a gay man that refers to a bundle of sticks tightly wound together, the Roman fashion.
Yes,
you can do the math.
That is literally the name
of
the dog as an excuse for many characters to say it out loud as possible. And we're introduced to this dog humping Eastwood's leg, and with Miles saying, "Oh, be careful that he doesn't rape you."
Yeah. The second or third rape joke of the film.
Yeah. And like
unbelievable.
I'd like to go like the whole middle third of this movie, they're just like hanging out in Monument Valley. Like George Kennedy has some like sort of cool like swinging motel where there's always like young people hanging out and drinking, and Eastwood's there trying to like abstain from drink and sex while he prepares to climb a mountain. But like there's just so much. I just like, even though it's so odd, like I really appreciated just like how much just hanging out there is in this movie, and it's just like it's Clint and George Kennedy, and you could tell like they you could tell they get along great in real life, and they're just chopping it up, having a great time, just doing some light war crimes to various ethnic and sexual stereotypes.
Yes.
Yeah, well, and that's what's just so interesting is that you'll go from a scene where you're genuinely getting kind of involved in a little bit of the chemistry between Eastwood and between Kennedy, and like Eastwood does have some he could have been in an espionage actor in this time especially, and especially when you get into the climbing sequences, like even in the Monument Valley, like before the Eiger stuff, like this section of the film is climaxed by a great like climb and talk scene between Kennedy and Eastwood talking
Oh,
through
it's
the
so
mission
good.
while he really climbs the Monument Valley and even swings his way across it. And it's just incredible landscape imagery, like obviously amazing real stunt work that Eastwood is actually doing. I mean, they're actually shooting on zoom lenses and stuff like that. Like
there's an amazing shot of like him and George Kennedy, just the two of them sitting on top of one of these like incredibly thin but astonishingly tall mesas out there. And it's just like, it's one of those shots where I'm just asking, like, how did they film that?
Yeah. There's also a really amazing, and I'm pretty sure it's him in the shot where they show the mountain and they just keep doing a zoom in, and I think they're using a helicopter, and eventually it shows Eastwood actually climbing up like two ledges, and he's kind of pressing his feet up against one side and his back up against the other and shimmying up. And it's just like, it's incredible cinematography, but for him to actually do that too. And there's a ton of things where he's actually dangling from one rock to the other, just in the middle of nothing. Like it's really unbelievable stunt work that he's doing. Dangerous stuff, as we know.
All the climbing stuff in this movie is fantastic, and like it gets back to like Josh, like the quote you read at the beginning about like his blade like face and broad shoulders, and just Clint Eastwood as a physical presence. Like he is, like very much he is doing that climbing himself in a lot of these scenes, and just like there is a physical credibility to him as a mountain climber, and like the way he moves, and like I don't know, I just thought I thought it all worked great, like all the mountain climbing stuff.
Oh, absolutely. And Eastwood like made it his mission. When he took this movie, he was like, I'm not using a stuntman because I want to film this on a telephoto lens. I want to zoom in. I want to see the landscape, and I want to zoom in. And when you zoom in on the landscape, you see that that's really my face and that I'm, really doing that. And in order to do that, like behind the scenes, he was taught by a mountaineer and documentary filmmaker named Mike Hoover, who was, he also hired, eventually after teaching him how to climb, to actually shoot the most dangerous maneuvers that they did shoot on this film, because the dude had actually filmed a documentary of himself at Yosemite National Park doing a climb in the 70s. And there was a great anecdote by Hoover in an interview in an Eastwood biography where while doing one of their first climbing sessions together, Eastwood looked up at him and said, I don't think I can make it. Like, this is like crazy. And he said, well, Clint, you really don't have much choice. And apparently that question pissed him off so much that he did the classic Eastwood thing where he pulled in his chin, as Hoover writes here, gritted his teeth, and with absolutely no technique at all, just blood and gutsed his way up. He was like, no skill, brains. No brains, just pure muscle. Like, I thought that was like such a great line, and it also resulted in him, actually, when they eventually go to the Eiger Mountain, like actually filming it. And we'll get into some of the set pieces that they do there and what happened as a result of some of those set pieces. But this is like in terms of, as we've mentioned, we spent a lot of time talking about the really silly Bond spoof stuff, which is definitely one of the main sort of contradicting elements, where he's playing this ridiculous character, a ridiculous situation, a series of sort of expository hangout conversations sandwiched in between pretty offensive scenes meant to parody Bond's racism and homophobia and all of this. But the other half of the film, and the thing that I think is more interesting about it, is like just Eastwood's very traditional action thriller craft. It's very sturdy. It's very stunning. It looks great. The lens work is awesome. The stunt work and the physical stakes of it, like, it's incredibly dangerous and suspenseful and exciting and gorgeous. And it's obvious the movie becomes a test. Like, how much of the bullshit can you withstand for some genuinely jaw-dropping filmmaking on display?
Yeah, and it's obvious that Eastwood felt the same way, because it seems to me as soon as he starts to shoot the mountain climbing and all of those scenes, he almost completely forgets about like the actual assassination that has to take place, and him trying to figure out as a character which one is the one he's supposed to kill, because that's supposed to be a whole thing.
I was going to say, I forgot we didn't even mention that. Like, he doesn't know the identity of the person that he's meant to be assassinating.
All he knows is that there's like a 4-man team that's going to be put together to do like this Eiger climb, which is like one of the most difficult things to, one of the most difficult feats you can do in all of mountaineering. And like, according to like Dragon and his contacts, like the double agent that he has to sanction, that he has to like assassinate is one of these guys on the team. And it could be the Frenchman, the German, or the Austrian, but he doesn't know which one. And then he gets in here because like George Kennedy, like his climbing buddy, is like the coach of this expedition. So like he's putting together this crew. Like the American, they get him to drop out so Clint can take his place. But like it's sort of like when they get to like the actual Switzerland part of the movie, then it becomes this question of like how is he going to suss out like which of these guys is really his target, or like or which of these guys knows that he's like who he is and why he's on this climb in the first place. Mm-hmm. But like you're right, like that kind of that whole like thrilling spy plot line really does take a back seat to like what Clint is clearly interested in this movie, or why he did the movie is mountain climbing and filming people climbing these actual mountains in the Alps, which is incredible stuff. But it's clear.
Yeah, he went cruise mode on it. Like he was straight up like, I just want to show my my audience of viewers that I am willing to do something absolutely insane and have all of you pay to come and watch me do it and see the effort that's kind of on display. And you'll have to sit through the boneheaded and amusing time capsule.
All the racisms, misogynies, homophobias. Really.
Dude, that line, "You have an incurable disease and you're too cowardly to kill yourself," that he says to the gay dude. Like, I understand if anyone just completely checks out of the movie. Like, there's just no defending a line like that, or when he like beats up his like buff boyfriend or whatever. Yeah. And it's just like, you kind of just have to, grit your teeth Eastwood style and get your way through it, because on the other side of that same sequence, you're going to get that incredible helicopter shot of Eastwood and Kennedy, who were helicoptered up to the very top of Monument Valley and are hanging out, drinking an Olympia beer together up there. And it's an incredibly satisfying like image and shot. And like it works exactly in the way that it's intended. And it's crazy how much the movie still manages to work despite how much the film seems to be shooting itself in the foot in a way. Which oh, go ahead.
Like with all of his all the war crimes that he plays for laughs in this movie, there is a certain element of it that like is, I guess, like supposed to be satirical of James Bond, but it's just the way Clint delivers it is that he's just so seething and venomous all the time that it's a little hard to see that he's like not like that they're playing this up to like as sort of a parody of this secret agent character, but it doesn't really come across that way. It's just him seething and spitting venom of just like these nasty one-liners.
Yeah, which is, I think, why, like, I'll just mention it now, because I think that's why when something legitimately comical happens and there's like a very obvious comedy beat, for instance, when there's that one scene where the guy is dangling because he gets some rocks that hit his head and he gets knocked out, and so Clint Eastwood or Hemlock is holding him and trying to carry his weight, and he's asking for the other climbers to help him, which he eventually gets, but one of them doesn't do it, and I can't remember. It's like it's
the German.
Yeah,
it's the very cocky German guy who's like, I'm the leader now. I'm the leader.
Yeah. It's like, okay, it's a classic three character study here. You've got the German guy who's an arrogant, cocky asshole. You got the French guy whose wife is cucking him more or less openly with the German guy. Then you got the Austrian guy who's like, see, he's the wild card. He's the best climber of all of them. But like that's the guy who I immediately keyed in when I first saw this movie. I'd be like, he's the double agent, right? Yeah. He's got to be, because like him and Clint have the easiest rapport. They respect each other. The other two guys are kind of played as like comic foils, or like one's an asshole and the other is like, just like a bitch. Like he's just
they're setting up a betrayal, but you just don't know which one.
Yeah, and so one guy doesn't help him, and so he when he doesn't, after this incredibly intense scene where someone almost dies, and they play that very seriously, he does this thing where he's just like, "Frey, you asshole," and he like keeps the hole going, and then not only that, but they do a big zoom out of the mountain as if like everyone can hear him and everything like that.
It's echoing.
It's a classic comedy beat, and I was just like, that is just so much more jarring now because of everything else that we've seen that's been trying to pull itself off as comedy here and there.
Even more jarring in that specific scene that you're talking about is they really filmed on the Eiger, like very famously treacherous. The translation of the mountain's name is literally ogre in German. And they started the production by doing all of the most dangerous shots with Hoover first, having Hoover do the shooting and, the mountain climbers do the climbing that they were doing, including that rock slide sequence that Jamie just referenced, where one guy gets in a lot of trouble and there's this incredible POV shot of like the rocks practically falling on the camera. Mm-hmm. Well, a guy died getting that shot.
Yeah.
One of the young climbers was crushed by a boulder as Hoover was shooting the POV shot. And Eastwood apparently felt so like terrible that it was like day 1 or day 2, and they basically killed one of the mountain climbers. That they considered shutting the production down and just saying that was it. And supposedly the other climbers kind of persuaded him into, all of the mountain climbers who are here, we would have all done this anyway. We know the risks of this trade. And
I believe that, considering like just documentaries that I've seen of people with this mindset, it seems like they would be on board with that. Like,
that free solo guy would have been totally cool being on Clint Eastwood's team.
Yeah.
These guys are mountain climbers. They already have a fucking death wish. So, and if you give your life in the service of God Eastwood, then you go to mountain climbing Valhalla for all of eternity.
Absolutely. Oh man.
Yeah, but that again just speaks to like the intensity of what they were shooting, and like the fact that Eastwood is kind of keeping up with these like actual climbing enthusiasts who are doing one of the most dangerous climbs that you could possibly do in this time. So it's really interesting to see that, and it has an effect on the actual filmmaking that you're watching, like those mountain vistas and that amazing telephoto zoom that they will do, where you can just really see Eastwood's face being like, how this is like a fucking crazy height level that I'm at, it'll also shoot like a beautiful sunset up there with them, or like a cloud or weather formation that's starting to take them over, or a sudden rock fall like that. Like it's very, very gorgeous and scary.
Yeah.
And what I love about like the whole climax of this movie, where they're doing this, they're attempting to do this ascent to the summit of the Eiger, which has never been attempted before. It's like incredibly dangerous, but like the setup is that that Clint's character, Professor Hemlock, was supposed to, or at least like try as best he could to suss out which of the 3 guys was his target before they start climbing this fucking mountain together. And it creates this scenario where like these 3 guys now, like these 4 guys, like their lives are like all in each other's hands. Because like they are just like, they're literally roped to each other on like a cliff face, and like one mistake is death. And it sets up this like I said, like James Bond would never do this, and like the movie really allows you to think, and like sets up this very nasty proposition that Clint his character may just decide that the easiest thing to do is kill all 3 of these guys and cover his bets, which should be very easy to do in this situation.
Yeah, just cut one of the ropes while they're all hanging off him while he's the leader or something like that. There's even a great moment where Eastwood wakes up at one point in the middle of the night, and one of the climbers is just with a knife cutting his frayed end on his ropes with his switchblade, and we just see this through like an image of the hand and knife entering the frame, almost in like a split diopter framing while he sleeps, which is actually later mirrored as well when the same hand later reaches into the frame to stop him from falling. So he is building like there's some vocabulary of sort of suspenseful thriller stuff taking place in here that he's doing well. But it is funny when you do realize that it's like, it really doesn't need to be this individually scary on a sequence level like this, because he could just cut the rope and they're all gone and that's it. Job's all done. And we also find out about what I think it's like halfway through the set piece, we get a little bit of exposition delivered to Jemima, where they're basically just like, yeah, all of this, by the way, is a ruse. Like this is all just a spectacle planned by the dragon to make it look like the microfilm was actually useless information, and we want to have Eastwood get some revenge killing so that the Soviets think they got something more valuable than they did by killing our spy.
Right, because if the Americans don't retaliate, the Soviets will know that it was all phony to begin with. So they gotta send this guy out there to possibly kill 3 people for no reason.
Yeah, so this like giant gorgeous spectacle that Clint Eastwood is shooting is like actually all just like for show, which is something that I don't think that Eastwood really thinks about when he's shooting the movie, but is like the closest thing that we have to like actually revealing that this is all meant to be satirical, that like this entire mission that he is really excitingly depicted is really actually hollow and pointless if you actually sit there and think about it for 2 seconds. But that doesn't stop Eastwood from making it like, you know, this incredibly exciting thing to watch on a moment to moment level on who's going to make it through this passage of the mountain. And, you know, or that bit where they get him, they get hit by like that flash freeze ice storm and they have to start climbing their way down. And there's a great bit in this where they actually because one of them dies because he gets hit by the rock and gets concussed.
The French guy, the
French guy, yes,
goes out first.
Yeah, well, and then they also have to drag his corpse around with them, which is just a wild image, watching them having to like hang his corpse off their backs while they're pickaxing and like a boot maneuvering away around the rock. At one point, they end up like using one of them as like a sled.
And like, you know, the movie is willing to like let you believe that Professor Hemlock is not going to do the honorable thing and just kill all three of these guys. But then after the French guy dies, it's like him, the German, and the Austrian, and like they've given up going to the ascent. Like they're already fucked, and like it's only about survival. And then it really does become like this very harrowing survival thing where it's just like I think it becomes clear then that Clint is not going to kill either of these guys. That like it is just about survival, and like they're all like they're just trying to get down the mountain. But as luck would have it, both the Austrian and the German die on the way down. So problem solved. And he doesn't actively
huge dummy falls of them flying off the cliffs, dude. It's sick.
When the Austrian guy slides down that mountain and you see that dummy go into that like just abyss like crevasse. Oh man, I'm just like, you won't catch me doing any of that mountain climbing shit. No fucking
terrifying.
chance. Yeah, and it is really, and like, you know, he does behave with honor. Like, you know, he attempts to save both of their lives, but, you know, it all works out in the end.
Yep.
Yeah.
But then you get the even funnier twist. You get the even funnier twist after all of it.
Yeah, because there's this amazing stunt that he has to do where Clint
it's incredible.
He has to cut his safety line over a drop of what looks like to be, you know, over 1,000 feet so that they can pull him up by the line that they actually toss to him, that George Kennedy tosses to him, realizing that, you know, he needs help now that all the other guys have fallen, which is a genuinely crazy stunt that Eastwood did really do. And they got these amazing POV shots of like his feet, like looking down while he's hanging there over that like giant ravine. And
like the George Kennedy and his crew are in this like incredibly narrow like rail tunnel that's just been like cut, or like some sort of like mining shaft. It's just like this incredibly like small cut in the mountain of like a man-made tunnel, and there's just like an opening that's just out into a clear like just drop off, and Clint is just dangling in front of this like door in the mountain way, and then it's like so carved into the side of the mountain, and he has to cut his safety line like while they like it just it's nuts. It's really good.
It's cool.
Yeah, like Clint has to really do that, and also is in that moment is when he's realizing that Ben, the one who's saving him, George Kennedy, that he's limping on the way to do it to him, and he's just like, he remembers what the dragon told him, that the target he was after was part of the climb. George Kennedy, technically part of the climb, is the guy who was planning it, and also he's got the limp, and so George Kennedy was the person that he was meant to assassinate, not one of the fellow climbers. And it's a moment that Eastwood plays really well, because it's on one level he has to be incredibly scared of like the physical stunt that he's actually doing, and also be like hurt by this betrayal basically at the exact same time when he's kind of piecing those things together. And also it does add in a sort of emotional complication to it as well, where it's like, you know, he has to hate and kill this guy in a way, but also in terms of his immediate survival, he needs to trust this guy to pull him up on the rope when he cuts his rope. And so it is actually like a pretty strategic little moment where you get these really conflicting feelings out of it. And they do have a conversation about it after, when they both get down there, where they go, you know, you took a chance coming up that mountain. And he was like, you took a chance cutting that rope. You know, like either one of us could have had a chance to kill the other one, but we are going to maintain this level of honor in this trade that has no honor. So they do part ways with a respectful truce, knowing that, you know, just because the job compromises their morals doesn't mean that they need to pointlessly add each other's bodies to the pile for their bosses.
Yeah, like the big joke of the movie is that he doesn't kill George Kennedy. He's just sort of like, well,
yeah, he actually doesn't kill the one person he was hired to kill.
And like the whole thing is a front. Like the whole thing is a farce that doesn't need to take place. And he doesn't do the thing he's actually assigned to do, which is kill this double agent. He's just like, oh, well, you know, like he's my friend.
The joke becomes obvious when you describe what happens in the film to someone else. What's so crazy is that Eastwood just doesn't film it that way. He films it as if he was like he was actually doing a tryout for like directing a Bond movie.
I think Dragon calls it that. He's like, you killed all three. That's extravagant. We like your style. Something like that.
Yeah. They were like, actually, that's fucking sick that the way awesome, that you did it. We love you.
Well done.
And all three of them seemed like legitimate accidents too. Perfect. He's the best agent we've ever had.
That was pretty funny.
Yeah, dude, I think that's almost like an Austin Powers gag that he accidentally kills all three of them and everyone's like, wow, you're the best agent ever.
We hope to work with you again.
Yeah, so good. But I think if we are pivoting towards the reductive rating round over on the Eiger Sanction, I think that, you know, like that is what ultimately, like that ending and the sort of conflict, like as soon as we do get out of like that second act where all the worst stuff in the movie is, and you get into the last like hour of the movie, essentially, like it is like just a really compelling thriller that and a really absurd thriller that does you know, seem to be playing with the pointlessness of its kind of depiction of the tradecraft and everything like that. So as a result, this kind of lands in the 3 territory for me, where I think that, you know, Eastwood's screen presence and direction basically overpowers most of the obvious things that are wrong with this movie, and you know, does actually lean into, you know, like the crazy stylish sequences with the albino Nazi who's like barely kept alive in like blood transfusions in a neon red room, and he is doing this like pointless spectacle revenge killing, and I think a lot of that stuff is just really strong. It's just, be warned to anyone who does watch it, you do have to sit through some pretty tired attempts at comedy and some pretty bizarre and offensive stereotypes in order to get there. But yeah, I'm just really, really impressed with the craft and especially the stunt work and the climbing and the mountaineering footage. Like on that basis alone, I think this is worth watching for everyone, undoubtedly. But yeah, you do get some weird whiplash by the fact that it's meant to be a parody, and Eastwood is basically just directing this as if it's a very, very normal, very effective thriller, especially when we get into the climbing and the massacres near the end of the film, and even the emotional relationship with George Kennedy, I think is good. I think Eastwood's instincts were right in casting Kennedy, because that is one of those things where their genuine friendship does come through. And I think he even said that shot of them on top of the Monument Valley is like a career highlight for him, even if, you know, the film isn't his favorite film that he's made.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think this is it's a strange time capsule, but I do like it. I appreciate a lot of what it's doing, but it's just the satire is probably the weakest part of it for sure. Some of it works. I would say a lot of it doesn't, but there are still some highlights. Once he gets to the mountain climbing,
the hollowness of the mission satire stuff is the stuff I think that works. All of the attempts at parodying Bond's social attitudes are a little bit more troublesome. Yeah,
because even when they're, like I said, even when they're doing the parody, it seems like they're just kind of doing exactly what Bond did, like the ass pat, for instance, like that's straight out of a Bond film, and they don't seem to be saying anything other than doing exactly what Connery did in that moment too. So it's strange when it tries to do some of the satirical stuff, but as soon as it gets to the mountain climbing stuff, it's amazing. The footage is incredible. It's awesome that Eastwood, you know, just went cruise mode and absolutely did like most of the stunts, if not all of it. I mean, I can't think of many shots where his character is on screen and his face also isn't. So it's very impressive. I would say check this out for the footage itself of just the amazing mountain climbing and the stunt work. But you probably won't take to a lot of the satirical elements of it. It's it's definitely a unique curiosity that only could have came out in 1975. Yeah. So even just on that basis alone, some of the jarring moments did make me laugh out of almost shock, but it's definitely still something that a lot of people would be turned off by. I understand that. But yeah, there is an element of like you really don't hear any of this kind of language or humor, and so there is a jarring element to it that can work in that sense. But it's still not like the jokes are funny. It's just you're shocked, I guess. I don't know, but yeah, I'll give it like a strong 3. Honestly, I had fun with it. It's just there's a lot weighing it down, I guess.
Yeah, I co-sign everything you guys said. I'd rate this about a 3 as well. I think the things that do work in this movie greatly overpower the many things that don't work. Yeah, and like a lot of the real stinkers and the real like dated fucking humor and social attitudes on display in this movie, despite the fact that they're barely satirical, or like it's hard to discern what the attitudes of the filmmakers are. I know Clint likes playing an asshole, but we've talked about High Plains Drifter, where he is playing intentionally a monstrous rapist in that film, and like it's the point of the movie is that he is like a terrible weapon in a way that the community uses. But yeah, it feels like it's not being deployed as intelligently here, we'll say. Right. Yeah, I'll just say like either you will be repelled by, or if you're evil like me, absolutely rolling at the hilarious big bigotries and jokes on display in the first 2/3 of this movie. But like I said, there is enough that is really great about this movie that I think offsets the things that are truly absurd and terrible. So I'd give it a solid. I'd give it a solid 3 as well. It's like it's certainly not like it's not gonna be anyone's favorite Clint Eastwood movie, but. No. If you're an Eastwood head, like I said, I was very glad that I checked this one off, because I thought it was like it was a big blind spot in my Eastwood movie watching. So I was very glad to have seen this one. Yeah, and he directs the hell out of it. So. Oh yeah. He's always been like part of that profile that I read from him was saying that at the time that he was doing it, he was sound designing Escape from Alcatraz, and he was literally like in his house in his own editing suite, like making choices about the ominous amounts of reverb on the footsteps in the prison on that film and stuff like that. So there's like he's very, very skilled and with the craft, and you can definitely see that coming through here. And the last thing I wanted to mention, because somehow we didn't mention it, John Williams did the score for this film, and it's pretty spectacular, actually. Like, awesome hearing him riff on doing the sort of classical mystery and suspense stuff in there with the exciting bombastic like pop action stuff. But there's also like this nice little like romantic motif about like the beauty of the climb while that's happening. Sometimes when the sunset vistas are coming up, that will turn tense or scary on a dime when the danger kicks in. And yeah, I just thought that was, both of these films are scored by like two legends, and I just was kind of surprised that John Williams, this has got to be like one of the only like spy films he ever did, so it's just very funny that that's one of the only ones he ever did, is this Clint Eastwood one where he's just the most racist, sexist man you've ever seen. But yeah, definitely worth a look for anyone who is getting caught up on their Eastwood watching. And that, I think, is going to wrap it up for the Eiger Sanction. We're going to be right back, and we're going to be continuing in the Clint Eastwood mode, but moving on to 2 decades later into the 1990s. We're going to be right back, and we're going to be talking about In the Line of Fire. Stick around.
What happened to you that day?
And this time, he'll be ready.
I see you, Frank. I see you standing over the grave of another dead president. That's not gonna happen.
Clint Eastwood. In the Line of Fire.
All right, we are back, and we are talking In the Line of Fire, the 1993 American conspiratorial assassination action thriller directed by Wolfgang Peterson and once again starring Clint Eastwood. And this is our first time ever talking about one of the gods of the TV dad movie, Wolfgang Petersen. So I wanted to start us off by just talking a little bit about Petersen, the German director most well known for his World War II submarine film Das Boot from 1981, which got him 6 Oscar nominations and a career in Hollywood studio effects-driven movies. He has a very good eye for artificial soundstage gorgeousness, really nice sets and matte paintings. Like early on, he was a very sturdy studio journeyman for whatever trend they were chasing. Like I watched a ton of his stuff this week to kind of get a little bit more familiar. When I did like movies like Enemy Mine, as well as The Never Ending Story, which are sort of in a similar realm to movies like The Dark Crystal or like Ridley Scott's Legend. Totally. Like very like 80s children fantasy with the makeup and the world design and music. And definitely those elements are like better than some of the narrative qualities of those films, I would say, especially like the makeup in Enemy Mine is like really, really great for the alien that Dennis Quaid crash lands on his planet and learns not to be racist against him by teaching his son what American football is. Awesome. That's great. The Never Ending Story, obviously very, very famous film. Most known, honestly, probably for the theme by synth legend Giorgio Moroder, who did the score for Scarface. And everyone just kind of trusted him on this effects heavy stuff because of the eye that he showed that he had for that boat set on Das Boot, which is one of my favorite titles to say because it forces you to say it with the accent, which is just Das Boot. Das Boot. In my opinion, that is up there with like John Frankenheimer's The Train as like one of the great movies about ground level wartime mechanics of history.
One of the best vehicle-based films, trains, boats, any movie set in
all
one
of them.
Yeah, they're great. They're all good.
Yeah, but any movie that like The Train or like Das Boot, if anyone even knows more films that are like that, but like that whole element of like the labor and the procedure of running these like steam oil covered machinery and like the sweat and blood of these guys who really like pump it in. And that film, one of his regular DPs was Paul Verhoeven's DP, Jost Volcano, who in that film for Das Boot, it's like a borderline documentary attention to detail on how to run that ship and all of the cameras like ducking through the compartments and watching the water leaking in as they all start drowning. And, like it's a really impressive piece of visual craftsmanship, and even the sound design is pretty impeccable too when the crew needs to like listen to opposing ships for their tactics, or they hear the rickety cries of the ship that's had damage done to it. They need to diagnose it, but eventually he would combine this skill that he had for this visual maneuvering of space and creating these worlds out of these great analog effects. And when the popular trends moved away from like kids fantasy and into things like he went back to his action roots with like Das Boot, and he became something of like a dadcore classic filmmaker of the first order. He got into like 90s thrillers really fast, like what we're going to be talking about today. But he also did one that I watched that was like a Diet De Palma film called Shattered, which is one of his better movies, and I won't spoil it for anyone, but it's Tom Berenger as like a rich dude who gets into a car crash, and he thinks his wife might have like double indemnitied him essentially, and he lost all his memories. He has to reconstruct his face and identity and like put his life back together Memento style with a private dick who's working out of a pet shop played by Bob Hoskins. Wow. It's like just one of like the strangest movies I've ever seen. It has like an incredible twist ending to it. And so he got started. Apparently Clint Eastwood saw this movie and liked this movie, according to Petersen. And that's why he said that he asked him to do on it. It wasn't, well, I guess because Outbreak kind of came out after the fact, and same with like The Perfect Storm. Those all, Eastwood actually kind of gave him his his bigger Hollywood career that got all those movies. Yeah, Air Force One. You're a big Air Force One guy, right?
Oh, absolutely. Air Force One is great because like it is pre 9/11 is like the perfect distillation of the neoconservative worldview. Except like they couldn't anticipate that it would be Muslim terrorists in the 21st century. It was just back to the Soviet Union again.
Yes.
But like Das Boot, a movie that's just set on one like a means of conveyance in the air. The entire movie is on
and
a
as
plane.
silly as it is, it does kind of.
But it's not just any plane. It's not just any plane, the greatest plane in the world. America.
Well, that's the funniest part. Clint Eastwood apparently is the one who got Harrison Ford and Peterson a ride on the real Air Force One, which they eventually used to reconstruct their sets and models from.
That's awesome.
That's awesome.
And as silly as Air Force One is it does kind of dive into like the kind of Hollywood procedure of what they would think, going through the Air Force One would be, where they're calling people and they have to get if they have to get recognition that it's the president that's actually calling them, they have protocol, all of that. I mean, it's obviously silly, but he does surprisingly dive into kind of the details of the procedure.
It's a movie where the president of the United States is literally John McClane. Like it's the silliest premise for a movie that's ever been made.
And it's doubly silly because when I recently rewatched Air Force One, I remember seeing that in the theaters. Just like pumping my fists in the air when like the American F-16s.
Get off my plane!
Yeah, get off my plane or whatever. But like Harrison Ford in that movie is like not just like an awful Republican president who wants to like literally announces in the first scene of the movie that America will declare war on any country in the world that like vaguely threatens freedom or human rights. But leaving that aside is like makes the worst decision of any president ever to stay on the plane to save his dumbass family, immediately imperiling the national security of the United States by directly choosing to involve himself, the president, in a hostage situation that is ongoing.
Yes.
But
and it's a movie that only exists because the president needs like a physical situation to make his ridiculous foreign policy and like express it, like literally muscle his way into the various neo-communist terrorists who have taken over his big, beautiful plane. But
of freedom.
What's incredible about that film, and to credit Peterson, is, and which will bring us into In the Line of Fire, is that his control of
it's sturdy.
like just like on a visual level and on a physical level, just the clockwork suspense action sequencing, and it will make you believe that the president could get into various gunfights and hand-to-hand combat situations with terrorists. Like the squib work is always great. The casting is great in so many of Peterson's movies, and like watching Air Force One, it's like one of the most ridiculous movies ever, and I'm totally with Donald Trump, where it's like Harrison Ford on the plane, he stood up for America. I'm like, absolutely, at 100. I believe it all the way by the time you hit the end of that film, even though it feels like it has an extra set piece that it maybe doesn't need in the last 20 minutes.
And I appreciate him following up In the Line of Fire with Air Force One, because it's sort of like, In the Line of Fire, it's just like, like Secret Service agents, like Clint is cool and badass, like he's saving the president's life, but like, nah, that's all. Like, we need the president to save his own life, like fuck the Secret Service. Right. They're actually in on it in Air Force One, so it's like not good enough to just have like cool, badass Clint Eastwood save the president's life over and over again. It's like, no, the American president saves his own life. God damn it.
Oh yeah. Which does finally bring us to In the Line of Fire, which is a huge turning point in Wolfgang Petersen's career. Maybe the defining one, honestly, in terms of his switch to like official studio thriller guy, given big Hollywood budgets, real eye for the action craft, and can work with big stars. I mean, shit, this guy would later go on to do Troy, which was a movie carried essentially by like Brad Pitt and Eric Bana and Brian Cox, and written by, I always forget that movie's also written by David Benioff and got him his like Game of Thrones gig as well. But In the Line of Fire was his big chance to team up with an American screen legend. And I did actually listen to a very lengthy interview with him where he did that thing that all European directors kind of do when they get involved in a project like this, because they grew up kind of watching American movies and they see them as like myths in a way. And he was just like, dude, the idea of just working with Eastwood and getting to use his face and getting to use him walking through a room. He was like, he jumped at the opportunity to do it. And apparently Eastwood specifically asked for him because he loved Das Boot, and for some reason he didn't want to direct this one himself, even though I guess maybe he was just too busy. Because it's worth noting, this is Eastwood at like kind of a second peak of his career, because you could argue like the 70s is probably his big peak, but the 90s was like, it was like a Eastwood is back moment. Like that's when he did White Hunter, Black Heart, and Unforgiven right before this movie, and right after this movie is A Perfect World, which is like my other favorite Costner performance outside of JFK, and Bridges of Madison County was like just around the corner as well.
Yeah.
So this is like Eastwood at the peak of what he could get made. He could do whatever the fuck that he wanted.
And
at
like
this point.
I think it's great that he chose Peterson for this movie, because like you can tell Clint really just, he understands movies and he's got great taste. And like the match of the two of them in this movie is perfect. I regard In the Line of Fire as like one of the, if not like, it's in the conversation for like the best 90s thrillers, right? And and like, yeah, like, I mean, this and here's the thing to keep in mind about In the Line of Fire is that, like, you're right, this did launch like a second Clint Eastwood renaissance, like an Eastwood revival. And this movie came out in 1993. And it is a testament to Clint that the entire point of this movie is that he is way too old to be doing any of this shit.
Yeah.
And then my man just has kept doing movies for the last 30
He's
fucking
still doing
years.
that now.
He's doing 30 for 30 years after In the Line of Fire came out. It's the 30-year anniversary of this movie this year. And
Still smuggling drugs. Still going undercover.
He's still at it. He's still having threesomes with hookers. He's still fucking getting propositioned for sex by seductive Mexican ladies. I mean, Clint is just he cannot be stopped. But like, yeah, like to see a movie where it's like it made in 1993, where like a big major plot point over and over again is that Clint is just past his prime and too old to be like running next to a presidential motorcade. Is great.
Yeah, but that's why his performances around this time are some of his strongest. Like that's why Unforgiven and why Bridges of Madison County are as powerful as they are as well. And it's why In the Line of Fire, like this ended up being a 3 Oscar nominated film, which you kind of look at this back and you're kind of like, this is like a kind of a bit of a pulpy cable movie in a way, but it's so well made by everyone that like and Eastwood was being taken so seriously as a, you know, as a artist at this point in his career, especially, and behind the camera as well. It really elevated this one, which we should get into for anyone who hasn't seen it. I actually picked up the brand new 4K Blu-ray of this, which looked amazing, by the way, but they actually have the best written log line for this that I wanted to read out here, which is Frank Horrigan, Clint Eastwood, is a tough veteran Secret Service agent who has been plagued by feelings of guilt and failure since the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And as the agent on duty that fatal day, he feels he should have reacted more quickly and taken a bullet for that president. And 30 years later, the current president of the United States is entering a re-election campaign. Following a number of death threats, he has been called back in to assist what should be a routine search operation. However, when he discovers that a professional assassin and master of disguise, which is true, Mitch Leary, played by John Malkovich, an incredible performance.
So good.
Has been tracking the president, the assignment turns into a deadly game of cat and mouse.
Yes.
And Leary uses his knowledge of events in 1963 to mentally torture Horrigan in the ensuing psychological duel, a duel that will eventually put Horrigan, can you guys guess? In the line of fire.
Yes.
Yeah, boy.
We're talking. This is A plus cat and mouse games going on in this movie.
It's
so good. I was blown away by how
good
good this was. Actually, I was watching for the first time.
Oh God, I mean, like that's
me
a treat, because like this is truly like one of my favorite '90s movies. And look, like you can't talk about this movie without talking about Malkovich, because Malkovich comes
Unreal.
through with one of the best villain performances like I've ever seen in a movie. He is
Totally.
him and Eastwood are like the perfect pairing of like Clint Eastwood representing this kind of like ramrod, like hyper macho, like gruff masculinity, and Malkovich coming through with this very like louche kind of like androgynous sort of like weirdo pervert guy.
Soft-spoken,
It's just like the perfect contrast to Clint. He's like I think like the best villain that Clint Eastwood has ever had in one of his movies. Outside maybe Gene Hackman in Unforgiven. But here, before we get into the movie, I want to just talk about
or Gene Hackman in Absolute Power.
Yeah, exactly.
I just wanted to throw that in there for a second.
The rough
where
trade
he's playing
president.
Bill Clinton.
The rough trade president. Yeah. But before we get like Malkovich, we'll get into Malkovich. But I just want to run down just off the top of my head the rest of the cast of this movie, which is just like
it's ridiculous.
It's
ridiculous.
This movie is so loaded. You've got John Mahoney, you've got Fred Dalton Thompson, you've got Rene Russo, you've got fucking Steve Railsback, you've got Tobin Bell, you've got Dermot Mulrooney, or is it Dylan McDermott? I always forget. It's Dylan McDermott.
Dylan McDermott.
It's Dylan McDermott. But I'm leaving some names off. But man, like John Hurd in like a small cameo role. But this movie is stacked top to bottom with like 90s greats.
Yeah. Well, and this is an expensive movie, $40 million movie. Like Eastwood could really bring in the numbers for Peterson. And apparently the concept for this movie had basically been around in the screenwriter who wrote a spec. So this is a classic, like, a guy wrote a spec script and it changed his life overnight kind of story, as Peterson put it, where this guy, Jeff McGuire, had this idea for I think the script in the 80s. And he was inspired by the real 60 Minutes interview that the real Secret Service agent, Clint Hill, who is the guy you can see in the Zapruder film climbing over the trunk of the car in that footage, basically like breaking down on 60 Minutes that he didn't take the bullet. And
okay, let me
so
ask
he was
you this.
very...
Let me ask you this. Did Clint Hill, the real Secret Service agent who watched Kennedy get his head blown off in front of him, did he spend another 30 years working in the Secret Service like Clint Eastwood does in this movie? Because it is pretty funny that they didn't fire him. You know, like that he's just
It's true. I mean, honestly,
just bad vibes, you know, just having him around the office, you know, just like,
I
thought about it a little bit during the film. I was like, why does Eastwood still have a job?
You know, the single biggest failure of the Secret Service that like the entire, like on a global level, let's just keep him around as sort of a mascot, you know, because let's be honest, most of what the Secret Service does is just counterfeiting. So we'll let him do that.
Yes.
Stuff. As you see in the very beginning of the movie with the great scene with Jigsaw, Tobin Bell,
where he almost gets his partner killed.
Yeah.
Well, and he almost does it himself.
Well, he puts a gun to his head and pulls the trigger because like it's meant to imply that he holds the gun in his hand. It's like a revolver, and he holds it in his hand for a second, and it's like meant to imply that he can tell by like the weight of it and of his palm that it's not loaded, and he just like puts it to his young rookie partner's head, who has like a plastic bag over his head, and pulls the trigger.
And then later he's even like, well, there could have been one bullet in it, and it's definitely played as like sarcastic, but you can't really tell if he really knew or not, which is kind of funny too.
Yeah, like so this is like, you know, this is kind of a ridiculous character in terms of, and that's like the pulpier element that I'm talking about. Like, like the guy who was there when JFK got shot, that guy just doesn't have a job with the Secret Service anymore, probably. Like, I'm just sorry to say.
And this
but Oliver Stone's
attitude, like he has the same Eiger Sanction attitude where everything that he says to everybody, no matter how higher up they are, if they're his boss, whatever, it's a sarcastic comment. It's a gruffy little, you know, machismo moment where he's just one-upping them. He never really has a lot of moments where he's you know, overpowered or anything like that. And amongst the leaders. It's the 90s, you know, so like his mild sexual harassments of Rene Russo are at a way lower volume than than Professor Jonathan Hemlock more charming
back in the 70s.
Around.
Yeah, like he's being
playing the jazz piano for her, which he can really do.
And you know, like he's leaning into like, oh, I'm this like, you know, old misogynist dinosaur, but like actually I'm kind of like his swaggy alpha charm just cannot be denied. So like when he's like commenting on how pretty, he's like, oh, the secretaries here get prettier every year, and she's like, actually I'm a field agent, and he's like, oh well, you know, blah. So like, yeah, it's just, you know, it's Clint doing his like sort of a man out of time kind of gruff, a little bit dated persona. But in this movie, it's just way less like nasty and seething. Yeah, like I said, it's just way less poisonous than it is in this back. No,
there's a lot more. Again, at this point in his career, there's a lot more genuine sort of like weariness to the characters that he's playing, and there is like a real aged experience on him that he, you know, it makes him well cast for this, which was made because it's worth mentioning in connection to last week's episode, Oliver Stone's JFK being the hit that it was, they were like, oh shit, this is like what the people want.
We're get some more Kennedy content out there.
Yeah, we're gonna fast track this thing. But what ends up making this movie interesting is that, you know, one, it has just kind of a solid emotional base and kind of a cathartic arc for this, you know, this fantasy of this guy who really wished, this real guy who really wishes he could have taken a bullet for JFK, and like, how can we craft a movie around giving him that second opportunity? But then with Peterson, it is given like this actual kind of like pulpy thriller, really sturdy framework of a cat and mouse movie based around the dueling mirror image of two government service agents, one seeking redemption and to save a life, and the other seeking revenge and destruction and to end a life. And as we've mentioned, played just by two incredible actors in very different registers and performances, just like completely nailing it. Clint activating his too old for this shit, like aging, sort of aspect, lost out of time, as Will put it. It's a good way of phrasing it. And John Malkovich, who apparently just went hardcore method to play this like slimy stalker psycho villain, and you can tell he is just like locked in and vicious in this film. Like that scene where we'll probably get into it, but like that scene where he just like murders that bank teller who thinks
my God,
she clocks him for like flubbing a detail wrong about his fake identity, and just like snaps their fucking necks. Like unreal.
That scene disturbed me so much when I first saw that movie as a kid. And like the way he's talking to her at the bank and stuff, where he's like, you have a very you have a very charming way about you. And it's just like Malkovich only does it. Malkovich does it only a few times in this movie, and it's like really effective when he does actually blow up and like showing it like this volcanic anger inside of him. But like he's so quiet and like slimy and just sort of like there's this like perverted, louche sophistication to him, like that I said is just such a good foil for Eastwood. But man, oh man, Malkovich, like the movie would not work without Malkovich, because like I said, like he is just such a good villain in this movie.
Yeah, and it's because too, like the way he at least perceives himself, and he is obviously like an intelligent person, but there's this thing where he's kind of like yearning for the respect of Eastwood's character the entire time.
Yes.
And so there's always this thing where he constantly brings it up, where he's just kind of like, I'm never going to lie to you. Like there is a mutual respect that I want, and I have that respect for you, and I want it back. And it just with his like soft-spoken delivery, and of course Eastwood's delivery back, where he's saying stuff like, you just need to get laid, fucker, like that kind of stuff. It's just
he's literally he gets some dirty hairy lines, and that's so what's so ridiculous is that like Peterson is so good at getting you into like the seriousness on like a tonal and like a thriller and like a physical action level, even when he's dealing with like some genuinely pretty ridiculous stuff that's happening here, like that opening sequence, which we kind of ran by already. But like when Eastwood is going undercover with Dylan McDermott's character, his new rookie partner, it's like a Miami Vice style like takedown meetup at a marina with like a counterfeiting ring run by fucking Jigsaw. Like you're immediately primed. Like this is like a silly movie, and then you do get just these really nasty, like, moments of violence where McDermott has a bag over his head and is being strangled, and Eastwood, in order to prove that he's, not a rat, he does pull the trigger on his head. But then when he realizes that he's kind of won them back, he grabs his real gun, his real dirty, hairy, six shot, and he fucking blasts those guys away like 90s squibs and blood mist all over the camera and stuff. Like it's just, And what's interesting too is that it's used as a fairly, like there's a serious tone in it a little bit, but like I said, he makes that joke about not knowing if there was an extra bullet in there, even though he knew about the weight and all of that. But then later on in the movie, they use this as a moment for Al that's very significant, because he's starting to have nightmares about it, and he's kind of he's like traumatized by it.
Yeah, and then that leads to, we'll talk about it, of course, but a rooftop scene and all of that. So it is interesting that it's played kind of in both tones a little bit in this moment.
Yeah, is the thing too.
Balanced.
Is like Peterson navigates it well. Like right after that, I think is when he's contacted by the wonderful European immigrant landlady who calls him to observe the apartment of one Joseph McCrawley, which is one of the many fake names that John Malkovich is going to go by in the film. Another one being Booth, after John Wilkes Booth, right, because the dude has a flair for the dramatic, or the panache, as Eastwood calls it, yes, he says in the film. Yes.
Malkovich says that wants to be called Booth because he jumped to the stage after killing Lincoln, and he has panache. And Malkovich, like I said, he has this I say like queer coded sense of theatricality and glamour in his evil plan to, and like sort of face off against a worthy opponent in Eastwood, but also like seeing in Eastwood a man with a kind of a similar life story of someone who has like dedicated himself to God and country and was kind of fucked over by them.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, well, and we can tell immediately what kind of guy this is because this landlady is talking about how much she believes in the beauty of America and the White House, and she's concerned about her tenant's shrine to the presidential assassination of JFK and Abe Lincoln. And there's even a quote printed off in the piece of paper in the apartment from the guy who killed Robert Kennedy. And I also love the one newspaper clipping he has out of where the headline is just "Assassins, Little Men with Big Ideas." And
that's the thing. That's the thing. Clint Eastwood, he's a big guy. He's a big man.
Yep.
And like these sleazy assassins, they're little guys like John Malkovich.
That's right.
I don't think he's that small in real life. But anyway, it's once again a great contrast between the two of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and Peterson's also giving it these great like voyeur thriller visual touches, like Malkovich spying on Eastwood, checking his room with the POV shots of looking through the binoculars across the street, or like that pull-out dolly to reveal him hiding in the alley where the only thing being lit are his eyes underneath like the street lamp directional lighting. Like it's very almost like, again, there's a little bit of like De Palma style in there when he's at home, or like leaving photos of himself from 1963 for him to find, where you get this great push in on like this photo that's like Forrest Gump style composited like Harry Callahan into the Zapruder film.
Yeah. One of my favorite moments too is when he's using the binoculars doing that POV shot, and Clint actually looks directly at him, but he can't recognize him because he's blocking his face with the binoculars themselves, because he's not even that much of a disguise at that point. So I thought that was a pretty interesting shot too.
And also, there's this amazing quality because there's some great visual stuff too, but there's also so much of this film is Eastwood and Malkovich talking on the phone, which apparently when the screenwriter Jeff McGuire sold the script, he thought all of that stuff was going to be cut out because he's like, it's very writerly to have these two guys exchanging dialogue for so much of the film. But Peterson was like, got him involved and was like, no, we're gonna film this. Let's find a visually interesting way to, because he's like, I loved the conversations and I could have seen how we could have got two performances out of these actors, which, listening to Peterson talk about it too, he said every single one of these phone calls was a live phone call between those two actors. Not a single one was like a script supervisor reading lines off screen. There was no like recordings used. It was like, if you're watching Eastwood reacting to Malkovich's dialogue, that's really what he's listening to on the phone, which is just, it's a touch that some people just, it's a little bit of extra work, but it makes a difference when you get those slow push-ins on Eastwood's face and he's really listening to an exploding Malkovich, hamming it up, dude, in the shadowy apartments that he's hanging out in, with like a line like, "Fate has brought us together, Frank. I can't get over the irony of you being involved in 2 presidential assassinations."
I didn't know the detail that they were like actually talking on the phone, and man, like you can really tell because like the phone calls that he has between Malkovich, where there's like the whole Secret Service is listening in. They're trying to like, they're like, keep him talking. We got to like trace the call or whatever. All the scenes with him and Malkovich on the phone are electric. They are they're the most riveting parts of the movie when he's like, you know what I've done for God and country? Some pretty sick and awful things.
Yeah, and I also love that it's like 3 or 4 times, I think, where they do the whole like have their conversation, they trace the call, they try to get to the place that he's at, and he's inevitably not there, or at least at one time, I guess it turns into kind of a chase thing, but it's just it's riveting every single time, and I like that it also escalates as it goes, because for most of the conversations, Malkovich's character is incredibly calm and soft-spoken, and then I think it's at a point where he starts to feel a bit.
And they get into like his CIA background, like as soon as he calls him out on his like
explode, and it's like one of the first emotional scenes that he actually has, where he shows emotion, and that's where they actually get a true trace, and they almost get him because they kind of trick him into staying on the phone, because before he's very intelligent and he's kind of calculated with when he's going to get off and all of that. So it's a good scene and a good character development to see.
Well, yeah, and I was going to say the key.
The Malkovich character is like closer to what the real life version of Professor Jonathan Hemlock would be, like a CIA fucking wet work guy. Who's like,
yes.
Like he wouldn't be this like kind of like cool, like fun, at like sort of a bit dickish art professor. He'd be like a deeply fucking psychopathic, fucking unstable lunatic.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what makes it such a cool connection. Because like he is basically playing who Eastwood was playing in the Eiger Sanction. But like, what if that guy got disillusioned by the hollowness and evilness of what he was asked to do? Like,
he never
like
got
every
laid,
week.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and one of the cool parts, because Jamie, you were mentioning that at a certain point Malkovich starts freaking out and starts getting like way more intense with him. It's only when the information about him starts getting more revealed, because he early on he revels in, you don't know who I am, but I know your entire history because it's public and because you were on TV failing at your fucking job. And some of the early stuff where he has the upper hand and he's like, I'm watching your movie right now, referring to the Zapruder film. And he's and he's basically like, late at night when the demons come, do you see the rifle coming out of that window? Or do you see Kennedy's head being blown apart? And you just get like this amazing touch in the editing where there is this cross-faded footage of the Zapruder film put on top of the slow zoom on Eastwood's face, where his like watery eyes are like remembering that day. And that is actually a touch that, listening to Peterson talk about it, came from Ann V. Coates, who edited this film, which is insane. The editor for Lawrence of Arabia cut this film. A real nuts and bolts editor, from what Peterson said, that she was basically in this era, she was the kind of editor who was like hunting to piece together every different style of take. So it would be like, she'd have 9 takes and she'd be like, well, he delivered the first half of that line better in this one and the second half better in take 5. And she would do the work to splice that stuff together. Like that's amazing. The kind of stuff that like Fincher does. And he has an easier time doing it digitally. But like, the editing in this film is amazing. And the other credentials on this is like Ennio Morricone did the score. Yeah. John Bailey, who shot Mishima and American Gigolo and Cat People for Paul Schrader, is the cinematographer for the film. Like it's one of those things.
It's stacked.
Absolutely stacked in all caps is my note.
Yeah, it's wild. It's absolutely
and it totally sells this stuff, because on like one level you could see how this could be like an unmanageably silly film, or even like in another director's hands this could honestly even be like a forgettable spec script that's not taken to the next level. But just on every department, on a casting and on a crew level, they were like, no, we are going to push this. And so you get a brilliant moment of editing like that. You get Malkovich really hammering at Eastwood, and you get Eastwood delivering one of the more emotional, and in one of the more emotional eras of his career as well, but like delivering like some actual, this teary-eyed stares that he does while on the phone while he's listening to that stuff. Like it's pretty brutal. And even if sometimes it's punctuated by like a Dirty Harry line, like do you have what it takes to take a bullet, or is a life too precious to you? And he's like, well, I'll be thinking about that when I'm pissing on your grave.
And with Eastwood, like there's always like in his film roles, there's always kind of this meta commentary on like his previous film personas. And the scene where Booth is talking to him on the phone, and he's going through like some like Playboy article that was like a 10-year retrospective where they interviewed all the agents, and he starts talking about like, oh, you were so honest about what your drinking did to your family, and then like when your wife and daughter left you or whatever, and then Eastwood like puts his hand over the receiver and he's like, how much more of this shit do I have to listen to? All I could think about in that scene, rewatching it, is that Booth is just talking to Clint Eastwood about what he did to Sandra Locke, and he's like, I don't want to listen to this shit anymore.
I lost it when they actually give one of the other actors the you are too old for this shit routine. Like they actually say it in dialogue at a certain point.
Oh, I totally forgot. Another great character actor in this movie, Gary Cole from Office Space.
Gary Cole, yes,
plays like the sort of like the young like sort of prick like
hotshot agent who has disdain for the dinosaur.
Like, but like, to be fair, he's like, why is this 80-year-old guy like on active duty like in the field?
To be clear for Eastwood, he's 63 years old, and he is doing most of the stunt work that we see in this film, or a lot of it anyway. That big leap on the rooftop he doesn't do. You can tell based on the wig that he's not doing that. But a lot of the running beside the motorcade, running through the streets and hitting his hip off of the car, actually hanging off that ledge, which he hangs off at one point. Like he is doing all of this at 63 years old, and he's putting the work in. But that is also what makes it, more, like less ridiculous when the characters are actually commenting on this and being like, doing pranks where they're like, he's having a false heart attack call on him while he's taking a snooze in the break room. Or, you know, they start playing various pranks on or making comments about the ridiculousness of the age difference between Rene Russo and Clint Eastwood when he's having all the various flirtatious conversations with her, even though he does get some Harry Callahan style statements in there, like calling her token window dressing for the feminist vote at one point, which is something you could imagine Harry Callahan. I think he literally says that in like whatever the third or fourth Dirty Harry is.
The one like the Time Daily where they're like, what is this? It's an encounter session or whatever. And then she's like, oh, what demographics do you represent? And he's like, white heterosexual jazz playing pianists over the age of 50.
We're a big lobby.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's just it. Like he's getting these freaky phone calls. And it freaks him out enough that he requests being back on the president's direct security detail and working the parade crowd control and running along the motorcades. And all of this stuff also looks really good. Like just the spectacle of the actual like political campaigns themselves, which looking at some of the behind the scenes work that they did on this involved like actually using some shots where they had 1,000 to 1,500 extras and other shots where they were actually just compositing Bill Clinton out of the shots and putting their president in and having like Eastwood in there and like just some ridiculous amount of work they were putting in.
You know, there's no fucking way Eastwood would take a bullet for fucking Bill Clinton.
No, they got to put someone else in there. They got to put another president in there.
Absolute power, baby.
He would be helping Booth if fucking Clinton were in the White House.
It's a heroic act.
But like to credit Eastwood, he's playing Frank with some real pep in his step about the job, and there is some like gags in here, like that great undressing gag dolly shot of him and Rene Russo trying to have a sex scene as two agents, but it's filmed entirely from like not just the suit jackets and socks hitting the floor, but like the sunglasses and walkie-talkies and handcuffs and guns and everything, and
tasers,
and it all climaxes on the damn. I got to put all that shit back on.
Yeah, that's such a good joke. There is some really funny humor in this that I think that it's mostly kind of it's in the same realm sometimes as what I think Eiger Sanction was going for, but I do find this to be a little bit more, I guess, tasteful.
It's way funnier. Yeah, it's way funnier and Eastwood's leaning into it like well, damn, Abe, I wish I could have been there for you, pal.
And him, himself a lot of the time, I think works a lot. He still keeps his macho integrity the entire time, but I do like, because with Eiger Sanction, he has like we were saying, the sarcastic remarks and all that, but he's never, there's really no poking fun at Hemlock, whereas he is able to do that with his character here, and it works well.
Yeah. Yeah, and I do like too that while you're getting kind of like these goofier elements of him making his way back into this job and getting a view of this job that he loves and all the experience he has doing it, you're getting more of these ominous phone calls from his friend, which by the way, if anyone wants to look it up, there is like a great SNL skit that John Malkovich did around this time for this movie, where it's literally his character Mitch Leary making all of these phone calls trying to get in contact with Frank. But he keeps just dialing the wrong number, and he keeps just he just keeps saying gets about like halfway through his monologues before he realizes he's not talking to Frank. But the actual he's
talking to the copy guy. It's your lyric, killing the president.
Well, and all of and some of it does become ridiculous, like the amount of tormenting and mocking him for his failures, where he's like, the Warren Commission called your procedure seriously deficient and criticized you and the other agents for drinking and being out the night before, and and being like, don't you feel like betrayed by your government in the same way that I am? Don't you realize that all that's left is the game, and I'm on offense and you're on defense? Like, he's so flowery with it, and the way that he talks about it, and he starts exploding at certain points. It's awesome. But I do like when he does start also kind of like psychologically mess with him just beyond the words too, like that rainy Chicago crowd event that they go to, where like You get the, like the police headlights in the wet streets, and Eastwood is groggy and overwhelmed because he has the flu when he shows up to that event. And as he starts to kind of lose it and get sort of swept up into the paranoia and like he could be out there ready to kill the president, the stress of this job. And the cameras are flashing, and there's this dizzying shot of the actual camera itself like spinning around, and the frames start getting like step printed as he hears like a bang from the balloon, and Malkovich pops one with a pin, and Eastwood mishears it as a gun and announces it as a gun, and it turns out to obviously be this false alarm, much to the embarrassment of everyone else, and he gets stripped of the duty and everything. Like he's not just mocking his ability, but he's making him actively look bad, and and that really offends him, because the only thing that he takes seriously is that he's good at his job, even though he, as we've mentioned, did the only thing you
not
really
that
can't
good at
do
it.
in your job. Yeah.
I also love in between all of this, we get these like little scenes with Malkovich where he's creating the gun that he's going to make through the entire time.
So sick.
And it's only through these small scenes for like the next hour and a half until all of that is revealed. And then he even does it's more of a campy evil scene, I would say, where there's he's practicing with the gun, and it shows how powerful the little plastic gun that he made is. And then these hunters come up, and
he makes like a zip gun pistol out of wood, which is like, what?
No, it's modeling plastics. It's plastics. He makes a homemade plastic handgun. And now we get into the part of this movie that like obsessed me when I was a kid. Like seeing this movie, we were Malkovich's plastic handgun in this movie, and the scene with the hunters where he just they're like, hey buddy, they're like, hey buddy, what get a load of that. Like,
that's a cool gun.
That's a cool looking gun. Mind if I take her for a spin or whatever? And they're just sitting in some park, and he's like, sure. And the guy shoots a duck, and he's like, man, how about that? He's like, what do you need a gun like that for? And he just goes, to kill the president. And they just look at him like, well, why would you want to do that, man? They're like, why'd you kill that duck, man? And then he just domes both of them, and then just sort of he has this little moment where he's just sitting there after where he just kills these two guys, just straight out, and then he just has a little sniff. He has a little sniff to himself, sitting alone, totally unperturbed in this little park, But no, Malkovich's plastic gun in that movie was as mind-blowing to me and my friends as the opening scene of Last Boy Scout, which posits the question, what if a football player just used a gun on it like a kickoff return?
Yeah. One of the best moments ever when that football player just pulls out that gun and caps another dude while he's running at the other end. Oh, so good. So good. Well, yeah, and this whole backstory of him being a model maker and, and the wet boy assassin who's, been involved in the Contras, and they're all kinds of crazy shit that they give him. And it does lead to, as he starts uncovering his identity, as we've mentioned, the phone calls get a little bit more tough. He starts freaking out about what he's done for God and country, and he does deliver the great line, I have a rendezvous with death, and so does the president, and so do you, Frank. And he's like, you have a rendezvous with my ass, motherfucker. Just amazing delivery from Clint.
Blunt. Oh my God.
Yeah, which leads to a great little rooftop chase that contains one of the most amazing moments in the film, where Eastwood is hanging from the ledge like Jimmy Stewart in Vertigo, which he really did on this real location, not a blue screen. That is
real. Yeah, that's awesome.
Like an actual couple stories he's hanging off.
That's a 63-year-old man hanging on for his life. You can see that on screen. Yeah.
That's
pretty amazing just to watch. And also the incredibly silly detail that, he's barely hanging on for his life. Malkovich extends him his hand, and he's like, it's literally that moment at the end of the Eiger Sanction where it's like, this guy wants to kill me, but at the same time, I need to rely on him for my immediate physical safety, survival. And Clint Eastwood pulls a gun on him while Malkovich is trying to lift him up, which is an insane gesture.
And then what does Malkovich do? Oh, man.
He puts the gun in his mouth and smiles. And he's like, fucking blow me away. We're both going down.
Yeah, he's like, you can guarantee that the president will not be assassinated if you just pull the trigger on me right now and we both die. But he's like, are you willing to trade your life for the president's? And it's like, well, no, he doesn't at that point. But it's a great scene. And that was God, like like Malkovich, like he changed the villain game in this movie because normally like you get a villain who's like as tough and badass and intimidating as the lead, but man, like again, I gotta say, like the kind of queer coded nature of Malkovich's character, where he just like to show how committed, to show how like next level he is, when he just opens his mouth and swallows the gun that Clint put in his face and grins at him. Oh. God damn! It's like it's just
right
he changed
before
the
his
game.
life too precious. Like it's just like
Yes.
it's unreal, and it also kind of implies too that he knows like that. I think Eastwood's character wants the redemption in front of people as well. I think it kind of subtly implies that because
there is a spectacle to the whole thing. The dream is that you take that bullet in front of a crowd and you dive in front of the bullet for the president.
It even speaks to the ending a little bit, and he is played as like he's annoyed, and I guess spoilers, and we'll get some more detail. But it is kind of played that he's like annoyed at his fame when he inevitably does do what he's set out to do. But he is in front of everybody, and he doesn't really take that bullet until that point. And like we have been discussing, he could have just shot him right in the head, right there, and
it could have been over right here.
But that is the whole implication. He's supposed to give his life over for the president.
But then,
it's interesting.
The news story the next day, no one would find out about the assassination plan. Like the news story, if the Washington Post covered it all, would be like ancient Secret Service agent falls off building.
Shoots guy.
Mourned by none.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And while we're still on this moment, I just wanted to highlight too that so apparently Peterson and Eastwood, this moment was not at all scripted that John Malkovich did. He was just in the fucking zone, and he just did it. And when he smiles. When he smiles in that moment, that is apparently because Clint Eastwood started laughing because he had no idea how to respond to what he was watching.
He's like, I can't improvise past this, man. This is some evil shit.
And Peterson was like, dude, that's the best thing I've ever seen. He was stoked that he got that take because it made him laugh, and just the weirdness and like the natural zone that Malkovich kind of found him in that moment. And it does create a bit of like a weird whiplash when then he brutally executes McDermott with a shot to the head like seconds later. Just moments after Eastwood talked him out of, he's like, my rookie partner is PTSD riddled. He's talking about quitting, and he says, "Stop that cockamamie bullshit." And immediately in the next scene, he gets that dude fucking killed, and makes that dude's wife a widow.
Once McDermott starts talking about his wife and kids, like about a third of the way through the movie, you're like, ooh. Sorry, buddy. You're not making it to the end credits.
We need to have Frank needs more motivation. I'm sorry. Sorry, Al.
Yeah, but we should pivot towards the finale here, I think, which takes place at a campaign donor event in Los Angeles in this very slick, very modern glass and steel location. It's another thing Peterson's really good at with the location work and with the sets and stuff. And there's lots of great low angle shots looking up at the building, which eventually set up the final confrontation, we'll say, in this building, like through the glass. But there's a great scene in here of Malkovich getting into the disguise in his hotel room in LA, where he's like slapping his belly in the mirror and crossfading over him, changing the details of his face with like a fake nose and ears, and loading the bullets into his keychain so that he can later, get that through the metal detector. There is like an emphasis on procedure here that apparently some of it was the real involvement of the Secret Service, who were, a lot of them are absolutely paranoid freaks also that were like, here's how the guy would try to do it. Here's our invention of like the guy who would do it.
I mean, it's incredible because I gotta say, Booth Malkovich's plan to kill the president in this movie is pretty good. It's pretty goated. Like,
it is.
He gets so close. He gets so close too. And that's the other thing. I don't know about you, but even when I first saw this movie, I was basically rooting for Malkovich the entire time. I don't know if that's just me, but like I was sort of like disappointed when his plan is foiled.
I will say there's some excitement to watching the procedure of what, like, is he going to get it? Like, obviously they punctuate it with moments where he's an absolute fucking psycho freak who will just snap the necks of these two random women, which was actually so brutal that they cut it from the European release of the film because it was actually upsetting, that they didn't like hearing the neck cracks. And Malkovich said
cold.
they should have put the scene back in where he kills the dog too, but they were like, that's too much.
Wow, they killed the dog too. That's fucking wild.
They did everything. So you contrast that with the cross-cutting of the minutia of the Secret Service, who are like sweeping the sewers and setting up their sharpshooters and the surveillance cameras and the televisions and everything, and going Eastwood style Dirty Harry with like just like assaulting the bellboy at one point. All the standard stuff that the Secret Service, I'm sure, does. But that last bit does get him taken off duty once again, not to embarrass the president. And there's this amazing scene where he's in the suite with Rene Russo, who delivers him the bad news that they're like, look, we know you helped try to make this event safe, but you're being fired once again because you're a fucking crazy man. And he delivers this really terrific monologue about all of his regrets from, you know, the JFK assassination, where he's like, you know, for years now, I've listened to all these idiots on bar stools with their pet theories on Dallas, how it was Cubans or the CIA or white supremacists or the mob. And whether there was one weapon or whether there was five, none of that's meant too much to me. Because it's Leary questioning me on whether I had the guts to take that fatal bullet. God, that was a beautiful day. The sun was out, you know, everything's been raining, and the first shot sounded like a firecracker. I looked over, I saw him, I could tell he was hit. I don't know why I didn't react. I should have reacted. I should have been running flat out. I just couldn't believe it. And he's, you know, Eastwood is just like absolutely going for it. It's the slow push in on, you know, his, and he is like tearing up, and he does by the end of this just kind of like outright cry in this scene, which I was like kind of mind blown by, because I was like, how many times have we actually seen Clint Eastwood cry in a movie? Actually, like it's crazy that it's for this like pulpy thriller that he's done, that he's delivering this monologue, which I eventually found out by watching this interview with Peterson, that Eastwood really did break down and cry. And it was because of this moment of directing that he gave, where it was corroborated in the Vulture obituary on Peterson, and on his director's commentary that he gives as well, where basically quoting from that Vulture article, reportedly unbeknownst to Eastwood himself, director Peterson told Rene Russo to gently grab the actor's hand off camera during a key point in the monologue, which prompted this rare display of emotion and resulted in this moment where he actually does like look away from the camera and just start crying by the end of the monologue, which is like not, you could tell it was a real thing, because that's not what you're supposed to do.
And he's just like, oh my God, breaks down.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Jesus.
Peterson and Rene Russo made Clint Eastwood cry for the first time in his life, and it was captured on camera in this.
And just to
like,
reiterate,
the sincere touch of a woman.
Just to reiterate, so as well, Rene Russo is wonderful in this movie, because she was like,
oh yeah,
so good.
She was like, you know, like she was like a 90s babe, you know, like she was in so many great movies in the 90s, and she's fantastic in this. And it's just like, even though like the, like, I don't know, the creakiness, you know, like it's played for laughs because like he's so much older than her, and it's like obviously inappropriate, but like she succumbs to his obvious charms, you know. Like I thought the love story between him and Rene Russo I thought were great. I thought like the chemistry between the two of them I thought really
there's
worked.
an adult sensitivity to it that's definitely there. Like when she eventually grabs his hand and it pulls out to that wide shot of those two in the presidential suite, you know, her just having seen this real display of like this guy who is just, you know, like this tragic moment with this guy who's being completely open with her, and you know, like there's something there that does kind of, I think, elevate it when it gets into, you know, when it tries to get back into the final set piece stuff that is just kind of insane, where like Frank, he gets fired and he, you know, starts going back into the off-duty investigating, where he connects Leary to the bank where he killed that new account's teller. And we find out that he did so he could make a high-profile donation and get into the donor dinner party. And there's this really exciting cross-cutting watching Eastwood put these pieces together, seeing Malkovich come into play exactly as he planned everything, like bypassing the metal detector, piecing his gun together underneath the fancy tablecloth. Like all of the editing in this is just amazing as you're watching these two things go back and forth, and just the refusal to limit the spectacle of the politics as well, despite the danger. They're just like, yeah, he's going to get killed at this donor party, by the way. They're like, no, we don't care. It's too important that he goes to this LA donor party. Yeah. And it eventually climaxes in that incredible close-up followed by the point of view zoom shot from Eastwood barging into the dinner party, looking at that seating chart to be like, where is Malkovich in here? And just the sweat and him using his finger along the thing to figure out exactly where he is. And then he looks up, and that zoom where he just sees Malkovich, the gun underneath the cloth, ready to John Wilkes Booth the president right then and there, and that amazing slow-mo dive of just redemption.
Oh,
takes that shot for the president. So fucking good.
And it's wild that right after that too, Malkovich just turns around and blasts one of the agents, like a nameless agent, in the chest, and just like full on.
It's a really violent movie.
Oh, it's crazy. Yeah, the full on squibs, and that, like we were mentioning earlier, the plastic gun. The power of this thing is almost like it's a shotgun, but it's just the size of a pistol. They put so much emphasis on the power of it. It's wild.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's still not over yet. There's one last sequence, where it is a glass elevator hostage situation with this really gorgeous sunset, sort of like matte painting backdrop, because they couldn't get the right angles to shoot this for real. Even though we have seen shots of this elevator where they were really shooting in the elevator, but they had to reconstruct it for this last sequence between the two of them, where to get this really moody lighting that they wanted, especially because there's that bit where Malkovich is like striking out all the light bulbs and stuff like that, so that the sharpshooters can't tell which figure is which. They look silhouetted from the outside. But there's also this great moment in here where he's like, Frank, do you believe in the nobility of suicide? And he's like, no. But if you want to blow your goddamn head off, go ahead, be my guest.
I don't know you shit.
Yeah, right to the very end, just kind of being an asshole to this guy, even though the guy is like trying to work with like a little bit of camaraderie.
Like, he can't get no respect from Clint Eastwood this whole movie. You know, try as he may. Like, he just like at the very end,
goddamn gratitude.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's also this really cool aspect in the editing where he's technically having conversations with Rene Russo and Malkovich at the same time.
He still has his like earpiece.
Yeah, this is another one of these touches that it feels like someone would forget to do this, but like being able to cut between him having the conversation with Malkovich and also coding his language in his conversation so that it can be read as orders to Rene Russo, who he's trying to talk through how to get him out of this situation. Like, it's just, again, it's the thrill of the job of making its way into the craft of the movie in a way, which is something that, you know, is always welcome and elevates a movie like this. And yeah, when he just like bends down, he's just like, shut up and shoot, and he's saying it to both of them because it works just in time for Malkovich monologuing about, you know,
he's like, I made you like you'd just be another broken down like piano playing asshole like you've forgotten about, but like I took you out of the fucking back room of the Secret Service, I put you on the news, like me killing you is going to be the best thing that ever happened to you. And then Eastwood's just so shoot, damn it, shoot. And then like right at the very end he goes, aim high, and that's when Malkovich realizes what's going on.
Like, you bastard. I redeemed your pathetic, shitty life.
Yeah, well, and he also does make an interesting point, which is that like in order for you to be really good at your job in the way that you want to be, like I need to exist. Like I serve a purpose.
You
like,
need me assassinating that president. You want me on that grassy knoll. You need me on that grassy knoll.
Yeah, and it does get to do a really nice reversal where Malkovich, after the sharpshooters take the shot, is the one hanging off the ledge after that, and Eastwood is the one who has to offer his hand, and he says, "You really want to save me, Frank?" He's like, "To be honest with you, no, but it's my job. You know, I'm gonna, you know, life is precious.
Still
I believe in
respect.
lifting you up." Nope. And Malkovich falls to his death in this incredible low angle dummy shot of just this person falling all the way down, cracking the glass, and his corpse just lying there as Eastwood rides that elevator down, looking at him too, which is just like an incredible image as well.
And they do
like
the connection of shots is awesome because you have Malkovich's body just, you know, right into the broken glass, and you see the elevator start to go down, and then it cuts to Eastwood and then cuts back to Malkovich's face just dead, like centered in the camera, zoomed in. It's awesome. It's really good.
Yeah. And other than one last scene where him and Rene Russo go back to the Washington Monument where they spend a little bit of time earlier in the film, and listen to that voicemail.
Yeah, really good. Like the very last scene is like Eastwood is officially retired from the Secret Service agent because he's like, well, you and the media put my damn photo everywhere, so I'm done for undercover work, and I'm
too damn famous.
I'm certainly not taking a bullet for a Democrat president. No, he didn't say that. But him and Rene Russo, their relationship has officially blossomed, and they're in love with each other, and they go back to Clint's apartment, and it's like empty, his sort of like bachelor pain hole that he's been living in for the past 40 years. And they're like, oh, you have one voice message, and like on the answering machine, and it's Booth leaving like recorded one last message to him, and he's like, hey, so like just don't know what happened. At least one of us is dead, but I just want to say it's been really fun working with you, and I guess you'll know what happened by this point, or you won't because you'll be dead. But I knew just bye.
Well, and also it's the I worry that you don't have a life to get on with after our game is over.
Yes,
you're a good man,
now.
and good men like you and me are destined to walk a lonely road.
As he walks
goodbye
out the
and
door
good luck,
with Lily. So yeah, it's a nice little touch. But I do
that Morricone theme
one of us
kicking
is dead.
back in.
How you doing, man? It was nice working with you. It's a great little message.
Yeah. Yeah, really, really great stuff. And if we are pivoting, I think, towards the reductive rating round, this got a very, very solid 4 from me, honestly.
Yeah.
Like, just, again, very sturdy, very well made post Oliver Stone's JFK cat and mouse assassination thriller. I do like that we touched on a little bit, but like the detective element of it, where you do have a little bit of, you got some voyeur stalker set pieces. You got John Malkovich doing master of disguise shit in this. You've got like a Hitchcock rooftop chase in this thing. It's pretty pulpy and exciting in that way. And also, again, I think the thing that really elevates this, obviously, other than like such an incredible crew like Peterson, who's already skilled at the clockwork mechanics of shooting something like this, and Paul Schrader, DP John Bailey, who's doing awesome steady cam maneuvering and the lonely voyeuristic compositions he's doing, Andy Coates, Ennio Morricone. Like, other than that, it also just gives like a really nice cathartic arc for this main Secret Service agent. And it is like, it's similar to Air Force One. Like, it's a complete fantasy in a way. It's like this guy wants he wants that redemption. He's like, I'm an old guy who wishes I took the bullet. I never took the bullet. Well, let's introduce this younger, thwarted, former CIA crazy dude who is sort of a mirror image to you, who's going to torment you like a ghost. But at the same time, he's going to give you your second shot, and literally your second shot and your chance to take it in the chest.
You have one shot. Do not miss your chance to blow the president's head off.
Absolutely. Like that's actually just like a good concept for a movie. And Eastwood and Malkovich together, it's an unreal energy between Eastwood being weary and being a dinosaur lost out of time, and Malkovich, who is just full on stalker psycho method acting, tongue twister there.
Oh yeah.
And just maniacally, belittling him, and all the phone call conversations are amazing. And yeah, this is just like a really great thriller, elevated at every level by all the various choices that were made by Peterson and Coates and Bailey. And some great Dirty Harry one-liners in here. It's the platonic ideal of like a cable classic film, where it feels like it's destined for that because of the script and where it came from. But yeah, just on like a pure filmmaking level, everyone nailed it. Like I was kind of tearing up watching Eastwood's monologues, which I feel like you just shouldn't be happening in a movie where, John Malkovich is like swallowing a gun because it's funny. It's just, those are two things that I feel like just shouldn't mix together, but they absolutely do. So this is a very solid 4 for me.
Yeah, me too. Peterson's direction is unbelievably sturdy. It's just, it's fantastic. Even there's scenes in here where it's like you're only meeting characters just so that they can get to the next step of the plot, but just because it's so well directed, you don't really feel like it's bloated in any way. Like, this is a 2-hour film, and there is some scenes that you'd think aren't incredibly important, just especially compared to like the stuff with Eastwood and Malkovich. But
no, it's kind of leisurely, but you like that stuff too.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think like hats off to Peterson for that. That's incredible, and it's incredibly well shot. Like, Bailey just shoots the hell out of it. Eastwood and Malkovich going up against each other is amazing. Specifically Malkovich. If you're a fan of Malkovich and you haven't seen this movie, you have to. This is top tier performance from him. It's unbelievable. And I just wanted to include one scene we mentioned the scene, but not the moment, where Al gets shot, and they do this awesome suspense where it shows Frank actually looking at the rooftop and not being able to see him because he was flung to the balcony. And so you get this shot where he's like waiting to see who shot who first, whether it be Malkovich's character or Al. And then Al's body just like falls over the edge, and you see like the bullet hole in his head. And then Malkovich, just to be sure, shoots him again.
Yes.
And Clint Eastwood looks into Al's eyes as he is just deadened, and it's so cold. It's unreal. So
creepy.
Yeah, this is really good. A really good film. So 4 out of 5 for me.
Hell yeah.
Once again, we find ourselves in complete accordance here. Our strongest possible 4. This is a movie that like I fucking loved when I first saw it. Like this was a classic of my childhood. This is a movie I like every time I see it. If it's on TV, I'll just keep watching it. This is a movie that like it holds. It is held up for so long, and it just gets better every time I watch it. Like there is no aspect of this movie that is lacking. Like it's a 5. It's just every aspect of the production, the performances, the screenwriting is flawless. It's like I said, I think it's one of the best thrillers in the 90s. This is a strongest possible 4 for me.
Nice.
Hell yeah. Yeah. And my last note that we didn't hit here before we left, the White House set used in this film was the set for Ivan Reitman and Kevin Kline's 1993 comedy
Dave. Yes.
Just feel like I threw that out there. They used the same White House set because they had already constructed it for that film. And they were like, well, I guess we could have our president use that one too.
Nice.
Yes. And also for anyone out there who really liked In the Line of Fire and are looking for more of Eastwood's relationship to the presidency, I cannot recommend more enough Absolute Power.
Yeah,
which is like his adaptation of one of those shitty airport paperback thrillers, and is basically like a Clinton crime family De Palma movie where he's a professional cat burglar robbing a rich dude's mansion and just happens to come across Gene Hackman playing Bill Clinton, essentially hiding in the closet while he witnesses him having an affair and try to sexually assault and then murder this girl that he brings home, and the whole cover up for it. And Clint Eastwood does some master of disguise shit in that film as well, and calls the president
mustaches. It's great.
That bit when he calls the president a heartless whore, like just
so good,
incredible stuff. So if you haven't seen that, I'd recommend. It's a good follow up for In the Line of Fire.
Yeah,
but I think that is going to wrap it up for
movie too. Anyway.
Yes, that's true. But I think that is going to wrap it up for everything this week. That was the Eiger Sanction from 1975, as well as In the Line of Fire from 1993. Thanks so much, Will, for joining us and for talking about Eastwood with us. This is the part of the show where we usually have you plug whatever's going on, and I think you have like a pretty big thing going on right now.
Yeah.
Maybe some people who listen to a movie podcast would be interested in.
Listeners, do you enjoy movie podcasts in which the hosts discuss a double feature, Grindhouse style, linked by either director or actor? No, I am. We're rolling it out. The new Chapo miniseries, Movie Mindset, is finally coming. We're launching the Chapo Movie Podcast.
Hell yeah.
Same Patreon, but it'll be Patreon exclusive only. It'll be you already know the deal. It's a movie podcast. It's the Chapo Movie Podcast, but it's going to be myself and Hessa Denny from Seeking Derangements just talking about some movies. It's going to start out with a mini series, but we've got a lot of plans for this. Like it'll come back. Like I think we're going to do the first 10 episodes are probably going to be out in May, but then I would like to expand this and bring it back for like October and do a run of horror movies, and just it'll be like an ongoing, just sort of like the Chapo Movie Podcast brand is now officially like under the Movie Mindset banner. It's all available at the Chapo Patreon. And if you're a fan of my thoughts on movies or Hessa and her thoughts on movies, we're bringing them together. Movie Mindset, the podcast.
And if you listen to the show, you should be a fan of Hessa and Hessa's thoughts on movies. That's true. Absolutely go and check that out. Like that is a meeting of the minds.
Yes.
Yes, we can definitely recommend that our listeners go and check that out. But for our listeners, we're going to be back in 1 week's time where we are going to be over on the Patreon feed, continuing the last 2 weeks where we talked a little bit of Oliver Stone 2 weeks ago. We talked a little bit of Clint Eastwood this week. So next week over on the Patreon, I figured we have to do it. It's perfectly been set up for us.
Yeah, it really has.
We are going to be talking about 2 films about the life of being a podcaster or a radio host.
That's right. Getting our mindset.
We're going to be talking about Clint Eastwood's directorial debut film, Play Misty for Me, from 1971, co-starring himself and Jessica Walter. Definitely sort of like the Eiger Sanction, one of the more sort of like interesting curiosities of his career, not necessarily one of his best ones, but it is cool to see his very first attempt at directing.
And with all the raving fans that we have, it's very relatable for us. You know,
yeah, it is basically his version of the King of Comedy before the King of Comedy was a thing. She's gonna psycho fan after the male disc jockey Clint Eastwood, but we are going to be pairing that with the 1988 film Talk Radio, directed by Oliver Stone and starring, I think what a lot of people will now know him from the movie Uncut Gems, Eric Bogosian, who actually also wrote the play that the film is based on and co-wrote the script for the film as well. So it was a character that he conceived of himself, where he plays basically like a shock jock radio host.
Oh, that's awesome.
Who ends up kind of
he's good at eccentric characters, like with that one that we what was that, the title of the movie that we discussed with him, and he's playing that like crazy director that's also kind of a murderer.
Special effects with Larry Cohen.
That'll be interesting to see him do something like that again. I mean, I know it's not as like crazy or a slasher in that sense, but just an eccentric kind of shocking character.
Yeah, it's definitely a little bit more grounded than that, but his personality is very aggressive, and it creates an audience base that he attracts that is maybe a little bit unhinged and starts to threaten him. And it's a very interesting film, and it's we'll talk about that next week. But I can't remember, Jamie, have you seen Talk Radio?
No. It's
okay.
One of
then
those,
I don't want to say anything more because I don't want to spoil it.
Yeah, it's one of those films that I have almost watched like 1,000 times and I just haven't yet. So I'm stoked to watch it. That's perfect. Well, I'm excited because honestly, it's one of my favorite Oliver Stone films, up there with like JFK and Born on the 4th of July, and I'm trying to think what else is kind of up. I like Platoon as well. I still for Platoon, I think.
Yeah, Platoon's strong.
Yeah.
But in 2 weeks' time, we are going to be back with a special guest where we are going to be talking about the man, Weird Al Yankovic, for the first time. We're going to be talking about his 1989 film UHF, where he plays the manager of a television channel. Moving on, we're going from radio to TV right into it. You'd almost think that we planned all this, but not necessarily. And we're going to be pairing that film with another sort of TV-related genre film. We're going to be talking about Stay Tuned from 1992, directed by Peter Hyams, who directed Sudden Death. We've kind of opened up the floodgates for Peter Hyams, so we're going to be talking about a little bit more Peter Hyams. And honestly, this is one of his kind of weird curiosities as well, which involves like, I don't even know, like disappearing into a game show and like a home entertainment, like the new world of home entertainment systems, and it's literally like people existing inside like parody TV channels and having to actually like survive their way out of them.
That sounds awesome.
Like reality TV is the idea, but it's like, what if you got like sucked into your TV a little bit?
Cool. Yeah, that sounds awesome.
So yeah, that's what we are going to be talking about in 2 weeks' time over on the main feed. So look forward to that. But that being said, that does wrap it up for everything this week. Thanks so much for listening, and keep it sleazy.
Keep it sleazy, everybody.